Welcome to ToV Live. It is Valhalla time. And before we get started, hello everybody there in the chat, on the live stream. If you're listening to this ToV Podcast audio or on YouTube retroactively, or if you're live here on Twitch or on Facebook, welcome to the live stream tonight. Before we get started, I got something to read, and this is from, and I'm sorry if I butchered this name, but Vecna post this. It was last week on the Discord, and I just like it so much because I love Independence Day, and so in my best Bill Pullman, which is actually quite horrible, I'm going to give this a shot. Good morning. In less than 36 days, backers from here, and it's actually now less than 36 days, but backers from here will join on with others from around the world, and you will be launching the largest attempt to return Heroscape in the history of gaming. Gaming, that word, should have a new meaning for all of us today. We can't be consumed by our petty differences anymore. We will be united in our common interests. Perhaps it's fate that the campaign is so near the holiday season, and you'll once again be fighting for our board game. Not for HeroQuest, Battle Masters, or Titan, but for Annihilation. We are fighting for our right to play, to exist. And should we win the day, the 15th of November will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not let Heroscape vanish without a fight. It's going to live on. It's going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Heroscape Day.
Nice. Clap.
Nice.
Clap.
That was a really good translation. I like that. Thank you, Vecna.
Yeah,
Thank you. That was great.
Shout out to Vecna out there. I said, I'm like, hey, can I read this? Like, go ahead. I'm like, okay, great. And yeah, that gets the heart pumping. Anyway, yes, welcome to the live stream, everybody. Tonight, I have the usual suspects with me. By my side here is Jason, Rocket Robotics. Above me is Ben, Enclave Plus Ultra, and we have Joe Crazy. And we got Jeremy, they let him call it. And we have a special guest, another interview night tonight with the man himself, Chris Nadeau, Encarmine on Discord and the forums. Welcome, Chris, to
thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. This is a true honor. Thank you.
No, honor's all
ours. The honor is all ours.
Yeah.
I can speak for the guys. I couldn't say the honor is ours, but thank you.
It's gonna be a fun stream. It's gonna be a fun stream. Just trying to find some things out about Heroscape, getting some backstory, and we definitely have oodles of questions to get to tonight. So how about we get to that first, Chris? Just for anybody who doesn't know, just tell the audience about yourself, what you do, what you're part of. For people who haven't been living under a rock.
So I am the design and development lead for Avalon Hill. That includes the Heroscape game system, right? So in addition to Heroscape, it includes, the entire portfolio of Avalon Hill, as everybody might remember it, going all the way back to 1957. It includes other titles that we've been putting out recently, such as HeroQuest, Betrayal, House on the Hill, some recent titles on Risk, including Risk Shadow Forces. It's an opportunity for Hasbro to carve out a strategy gaming division and be able to do adult-focused 14+ strategy games as an entity within the walls of Hasbro. And so the portfolio is pretty diverse because not only does it include that Avalon Hill portfolio, but it also includes everything from Ellen Bradley, everything from Parker Brothers. It includes the potential for certain tabletop games that had been, acquired through Wizards of the Coast. So it's an opportunity to bring back a lot of really good titles, and this was a moment that the team aligned on the idea of bringing back Heroscape. So,
and like, just for timetable, like how long ago was the decision to bring back Heroscape? Like, how long has this process been going on?
probably about 2 years now, right? We had hired Craig Van Ness to assist us in doing some of the game mechanics behind Risk Shadow Forces. And so at the time, Craig was still running Soaring Rhino. He was functioning as an outside partner in product design for some of the game mechanics behind Risk Shadow Forces. And we were conversing with Craig every single day, right? So as we were kind of developing the business model for Avalon Hill and figuring out how we wanted to expand that and how we wanted to grow the team, it felt really natural working with Craig that we would bring Craig on board permanently. So Craig actually returned to Hasbro, as a full-time employee in the middle of all of this. And of course, Craig can't get through one conversation without mentioning Heroscape. So it's kind of a gratuitous name drop at least several times a day, especially when we get into like line planning and business reviews and things like that. It became a topic every single time. And when we saw success with what we were doing with HeroQuest, that we could relaunch what was a very expensive upfront kind of cost through HasLab, and then grow the game system through mass retail afterwards, right? We introduced the starter set into retail, and now are kind of seasonally issuing expansion packs for the game system. So when we were able to kind of prove out that model to a degree, it allowed us to do the financials and the viability of Heroscape, and incorporate some of the conversations and learning that has been going on probably since the day Heroscape went away. The idea of kind of how we would ratio packs, how they would go out to retail, what would be included in them. Those issues that I think most Heroscapers have brought up over the years of, combining unique figures with commons and making it really cumbersome to kind of do the repeat purchase kind of model with some of it, or issues where people wanted, multiple terrain packs, but they found themselves kind of having to buy starter sets over and over again and kind of, collecting a lot of uniques that really didn't have much value to them at the time. So a lot of those conversations went into, okay, how do we want to build out a model for Heroscape? And the sad reality about Heroscape is that the tooling associated with the original product line, that just doesn't exist anymore. That goes away at a certain amount of time. Those factories and those partners tend to recycle that steel, or it gets kind of scrapped as part of kind of the house cleaning that would go on in a factory. That means that all that terrain, all those figures, all those molds, those just don't exist anymore. So to get Heroscape off the ground and build a bit of a tooling library, so to speak, the opportunity made a lot of sense to initiate the return of Heroscape through the Hasbro Pulse crowdfunding system.
All right, and we're going to get into a little bit of crowdfunding in a minute. First, a couple of things I want to ask about you yourself. Like, how did you start getting working at like Hasbro, Avalon Hill, and what was your motivation to get into like this miniature wargaming creation?
Sure. So I've always been a wargamer. I actually kind of first cut my teeth as a kid. We had the 1976 Risk in the house. So it was very common to play Risk, Stratego, games like that. And back in '87, there were a couple of gentlemen, a couple slightly older boys in the neighborhood who had a copy of Space Hulk, and that was the bug. That was the thing that hooked me. That I got a chance to play Space Hulk. I got absolutely wrecked by a bunch of Gene Stealers in like 4 turns, but such as the plight of like an 8-year-old attempting to play Space Hulk. And I believe not even a year or so later, I think we all got to see Adeptus Titanicus, and it had all the modular scale buildings and the different Titans that you could kind of plug in the plasma eradicators and macro cannons, things like that. And that was it. At that point, I already had in my possession a first edition Rogue Trader. I was kind of knee deep into kind of stumbling through painting miniatures, collecting just about every pewter fantasy miniature I could find at like the local shopping mall, playing Dungeons and Dragons, getting into different role play and pen and paper stuff. So that was kind of my childhood, kind of giving me that opportunity to kind of define myself as a gamer. I went to college for fine arts. I have a double major in graphic design and history, and I took that BFA. I ended up working in the sporting goods industry for several years out of college, and in 2007, Hasbro had released the first Transformers live action movie. And the artwork that was coming out of Hasbro at the time was so impressive. It was one of the things we would talk about in the sporting goods industry and in the company I worked for, holding up those packages and try to kind of dissect the art that was kind of coming out of Hasbro at the time and kind of figuring out how to reverse engineer it. And Hasbro was a local place. I was actually born like 3 miles from the headquarters that has been there for almost 100 years now. And so it was always a household name. It was always a place. It was always a dream to go work at a toy company and work at the place with Transformers and G.I. Joe and all of that was. And so I took a little bit of a chance in 2007, and I took a position at Hasbro on the back end of Transformers Movie 1. And over time, I managed to work on just about every brand at Hasbro over the years, especially on the kind of toy side. I had kind of moved through the ranks, gradually became a senior creative director at Hasbro, worked on a lot of different movies, different entertainment pieces. Most of the brands everybody can kind of sound off on, from that portfolio. And I was on my second tour on Nerf at the time, and the HeroQuest Kickstarter had just kind of gone through the HasLab campaign, and the team was starting to really figure out what they wanted to be, prove out that model, see if that was something we could do. And I was actually approached by Angus Walker, who was the original lead on Avalon Hill at the time when they first kind of got through the back end of that HasLab campaign. And he was looking for somebody to come over and kind of lead all of design development for Avalon Hill. So it was an impossible opportunity to say no to, being a gamer myself. This opportunity to build intellectual property, to flesh out the stories and the narratives, and going through a career of kind of the graphic design, the creative side of the business for years. It was also a chance for me to start to get into more of the product design side, start to learn some of the technical aspects of, the engineering and things like that. So that started back in May of 2021 was when I moved over to Avalon Hill. And it's been awesome. So at that point, we were still working on, like I said, Risk Shadow Forces had just started. It was one of the first projects that I kind of really sunk my teeth into. And hiring Craig felt like a natural opportunity to grow the team. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. And at this point, there's 8 of us, right? It sounds kind of funny when you think about it, because Hasbro has about 7,000 employees. So when you think about Avalon Hill, it still is like this scrappy little upstart company kind of buried in the depths of Hasbro, so to speak, at the moment. And, it's still in its kind of infancy as a team as we kind of build out what the business model is and the financials and the data and the insights. And I think that's a topic that I think keeps coming up a little bit on the Heroscape HasLab to a degree. You know, that understanding of how big the demographic is, how that demographic shops, where are those consumers, how are they looking for their next game. A lot of that data that kind of breaks down the gamer community from this level, from the strategy gamers and the adults, that's not something Hasbro has a lot of yet, right? And so on a company that prides itself on really leveraging insights, right, and using those insights to drive their decisions, it's just a reality right now that Avalon Hill is still learning this community, still putting that data down, still understanding where to go and how to talk to them. And part of that has been this idea of the Discord server that I think all of you have now kind of participated in at some form or another. Just having that direct conversation with gamers is not something Hasbro has done in the past, right? This is really Hasbro's first Discord server. And the idea of kind of real-time communicating with the fan community is a new thing, right? It's an experiment happening through Avalon Hill right now, and it means that there's a lot of other teams at Hasbro that are kind of paying attention right now. How is this working? How is this going? What kind of qualitative data are you collecting? Are you able to adapt and pivot to that feedback? Things like that are, other conversations kind of happening in the periphery of Hasbro based on all the conversation happening around Heroscape right now.
Wow, that's fascinating. Wow.
And I just want to give a shout out to the people commenting on the live chat. Undamp Pick, Stormbrook, Marion. Welcome, guys. Thank you for your comments. Let's see here. I just want to read some of these just so we're catched up. Let's see here. Undamp Pick says they showed us the cards, and that was referring to last week. Yes, we might get into that a little bit tonight. Also, Stormbrook is asking one word question. Lore? Possibly. We'll possibly get into some of that. Let's see here.
Lore?
Stormbrook also says they also confirmed they won't bring it to Asia or South America. Yeah, and there's reasons for that. I think that's been explained on Discord. Let's see. Undamp Pick says, although I was wrong in my speculation that the Honor Guard would work with Braxis. Yeah, discussing the cards. And Undamp Pick also has a question for you, Chris. Let's ask this real quick. Chris, what are your favorite memories of playing the original Heroscape?
So I was not an original Heroscape player, right? Back in 2004 to kind of 2008, at that point, I probably had about a half dozen different 40K armies. I was playing multiple kind of historic war games. I have an affinity for kind of World War II era history, so I'll play a lot of historicals. But at that point, I was probably knee deep in the Games Workshop universe, so to speak, where I had become a hobbyist at that point. And Heroscape to me represented a kind of gateway into larger strategy gaming, and so it felt like it was something that I had. I kind of passed over, believing it was kind of an entry level kind of gaming mechanic, and I kind of walked past it. So I was kind of outside of the kind of shopping for games at Toys R Us, so to speak. So for me, on the team, I am the objective set of eyes in the group, right? Almost everybody on Avalon Hill considers themselves a gamer. Obviously, Craig, understands the mechanic to a certain savant level, almost seeing the Matrix in it. But Patrick is younger than I, and him and his brother. He has several brothers. Heroscape was a weekend pastime for them. They were all very serious Heroscapers. So Patrick comes in with a strong kind of nuance. But for me, I've come in and kind of been the one who questions the status quo, the way it's been done. Is that really the best way? Is that the most optimal way? Is that the best mechanic for tomorrow? Part of the exercise of bringing Heroscape back is to kind of question and audit it to make sure that it's going to function well tomorrow, that it's a game that we can support for a decade or more, right? That it matches up and peers well with other contemporary games that are out there right now, so that it doesn't feel dated, doesn't feel retro to a new gamer, right? You walk a fine line because you're trying to be true to the nostalgia and the emotional connection that existing Heroscapers have to a game. Make sure that they can still have the thing they love. It still feels and smells and tastes like the thing they know, right? But for a lot, we're kind of in a renaissance of gaming at this point. There's so many awesome games coming out at this point. There's so many choices out there. There's so many amazing companies. There's so many awesome game designers. It's hard to make sure that you can kind of cut through that noise. And when you do, you have to make sure that you have something that still has those hooks. It's a good, solid, playable game that people enjoy. It can't just be nostalgia for nostalgic's sake. So that's kind of my function in a way in that group, by not being an original Heroscaper, that I kind of function as the devil's advocate a lot of times. And bring that into the room each time as a way of kind of balancing out the narrative.
It's probably a matter of finding the balance in things, and of course, like you said, and another way to say is like respecting the source material. When I write stuff for Tales of a House, some of it's going to be not really associated with the Heroscape universe, but I try to respect the material that was created in the first place and story as well. And it is a fine line, and sometimes it's hard to balance that out. But so far, I would say for me personally, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I try to look very hard for red flags throughout this whole process. And there might be one or two minor things, but there hasn't really been anything like an obvious red flag to where it's just going to be a total shut off. What about the rest of you guys in our panel? Have you?
You're talking about just the presentation of the game?
Presentation, gameplay, everything that has to do with it.
Especially looking at the gameplay that we had gotten this Friday, it looks and feels and sounds, and even the cards, is Heroscape. Mm-hmm. My best friend Glenn and I, we were reading the cards, and we're like, man, the Festering Honor Guard and how they work with the Queen, and how it changes this idea of how things operate, and it still uses the same language that the cards and these abilities use, but then of course like tweaking things and making things bring stuff to the next level, so that it doesn't feel like, oh well, that's ability, but on this character. So it's definitely just, this is Heroscape. I don't see anything where, especially when it comes to gameplay, I never felt that the game felt like, oh, this feels like a game that came out 20 years ago. I introduced this game to a bunch of different people. Either they're jocks, they're nerds, other nerds, family members, smaller children, and every time I opened up my container, and the first thing you got to show them is the toy end of it. And I take out the dragons, I take out the Deathwalkers, I'll take out the Morrow, and I'll take out Fourth Mass and whatever. And I'll say, like, what do you think is cool? What do you want to play with? And they'll go grab they'll grab this, they'll grab that, and then okay, now this is the card that associated with this, and I was like, all right, let's go find stuff that goes with this, and everyone is so enthralled with what this card looks like, and they can see, everything that's going on here and different in the picture and where the stats are, and they're interested in what kind of abilities and what do they do. And as soon as I do the spark notes of the ability, because some of them can be, a little bit longer, well, I will say real quick, is that Heroscape is the first game to teach me what adjacent was. Had no idea that word was not in my dictionary. So once you tell them, how to play, how they set it up, and you go, you know what? Instead of me reading the rule book for you, let's just play around, and I'll walk you through it. And just like the gameplay video that you guys made, and how Craig was helping you and Patrick walk through the entire thing, like that's the core experience. And once you get into that role of it, quite literally, you get to this momentum and this excitement, and by the end of it, you were like, wow, that was fun. You want to go again? So yeah, it looks and feels like Heroscape.
Yeah, the irony there is that was something we determined on day one. I think when we first sat down and briefed the project, one of the first 3 bullets that got put on that dry erase board was that it had to be backwards compatible, that it had to be familiar to existing Heroscapers, that we couldn't. This was not an exercise in kind of blowing it up with a stick of dynamite and changing the game, right? And that included kind of an audit of some kind of conversational discussions that we had, initially with like members of the War Council and things like that, to say, are there house rules that have become kind of common in the community? Are there things that we would want to adapt into the larger kind of official rules to kind of improve upon that? All those conversations were very, very early on to give you exactly what you're describing, Joe, which is, it feels like your Heroscape.
Sure.
Yeah, I also point out like that eye attraction too, to like that kind of entices like the younger generation, because my 4-year-old son, he wants the dragons, he wants the orcs, he wants the spiders, and
he likes fire elements.
He likes those too. Yeah, he says fire all the time because he sees my animations. But yeah.
Because your computer's on fire, right?
Lots of time.
Is that why?
It's
okay.
Yeah, that's the special
Machine's
effects.
just blowing up.
Editing, yeah.
Oh, special effects. I thought you meant real fire.
No,
I was making the.
Sometimes it probably would with the processing that goes through the thing. It's smoke.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
On a random side note, back when I did IT for university, a computer did catch fire once.
Oh,
it can happen.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
It can happen.
In fact, my college work study was actually watching over the computer cluster in the art building. So I get to load paper and replace ink cartridges in college as my work study. Make sure nobody stole an iMac out of the computer lab.
And one
No,
question.
but
Go ahead, Jeremy. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to say, like, really did appreciate the effort that you, Patrick, and Craig, and everyone behind the video and the card reveals and things like that, because I know that was a big concern a lot of members of the Heroscapers community had, was, worry about how much of this game actually, like, translates into a game, like, what can we take from that? And I know for a fact, like, initially it seemed really rough, but like when those cards drop and I'm sitting there, I'm actually at work when it happened, thanks for the heads up, everybody. No, I was kidding. But I just I'm sitting, I'm in the server alley, trying to get drinks and stuff, and I see the pings go off, and I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna drop these drinks off, I'm gonna go to the side and look at these cards, and I'm looking at these powers, and I mean, immediately already seeing how like the Frostclaw Paladins can, they're knights, so you can work with classic characters like Konkan, the Kyrie Warrior, and things like that, and you can see the design, like the care, I guess you could say, if that's the word that's coming to mind, but like there's attention to detail that's already in these card previews that adjust to the classic characters, and it's like, for my Heroscape history, right? I was there during like the developmental periods for like when Wizards of the Coast took over in 2008. I started interacting with the community more online, like I think a year afterwards, about that time frame. And so I got to see all like Battle for the Underdark and all that stuff like that when they released those sets. And it's like you can see when they were explaining their design decisions, and they made I remember when they made the bases smaller, and that made everyone just like it was just a flood of just the aggression. But it was like they explained the reason why. They're like we're doing this to kind of combine the communities. We're doing this so that way other individuals who play may not want to play Heroscape for Heroscape, but use the pieces for Dungeons and Dragons, other things, it can fit their boards and stuff like that. Like they're really really conscious design decisions that are being made during the time that these characters were in Wizards of the Coast possession. So it's like kind of getting that sensation again of seeing that that care towards the brand design and the elements that lead to its creation. And I really got that feeling from seeing the character reveals. So huge appreciation on my part, because old time player here just be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I can see this playing really well next to so and so. And then I was just like sitting there getting totally distracted on my job. But it was great. It was really, really good to see that. So thank you so much. Good work.
Yeah, it was actually a very calculated risk to not reveal the cards or the rules leading up to October 1st or on October 1st.
Right.
What was happening in the background was the war. We had expanded the War Council a little bit to include a little bit of a larger group that could help do a little bit more reps on playtesting. And what I was afraid of was if we revealed rules that didn't have the extreme confidence of that group playtesting it, the conversation would turn into like a little bit of a almost like a design by community kind of feedback loop. If rules weren't quite tightened up, if point costs weren't matching up well with stat lines, that things didn't feel really tight in terms of those powers, it was just going to create a lot of chaos in the community to just kind of rip it all apart. So the decision was made, let's hold back on revealing the cards on October 1st. Let's give that team as much time, every second we can give them, to do as much play testing as they can until they feel, yes, this is ready for prime time. And that was a decision we made because knowing we were going to take a little bit of heat for not showing those cards on October 1st, but making sure that when we did show the cards, it created that spike in enthusiasm that the rules felt good. The card stats felt good. And when we knew day one, Heroscapers were going to stop proxying those units and they were going to start playing them. And we wanted them to be excited. We wanted them to feel good about where that was going. And I didn't want to rush that process. I didn't want that process to get muddy. So it was a decision to hold back a little bit and make sure that those cards felt good before they got broadcast out into the community. And that was the decision. I know a lot of Heroscapers have asked many, many, many times on things like the Discord forum, show me the cards, where are the cards? I want to see the cards. I'm not going to back until I see the cards. I'm skeptical. But the decision was, let's make sure it's right, because that's going to be something that players are going to go through with a fine-tooth comb, and we want to make sure that the community felt really good about those cards when they start seeing them.
That's fair.
And that's really fair, yeah. Because a lot of people don't, this whole majority of the stuff that you guys started showing off, which, is at some point, even the concept art a little bit and how these characters are fit into the overall story is all lore. And a lot of people, in the beginning, even including myself, was not informative of the lore and the story. And it's good. I do really enjoy that it was part of the focus that you guys are trying to sell the game on, is that there is a story here. There is character, and even for people that don't know. But for the majority of players that are continuing to play it, means nothing to them. It goes right over their heads. They're like, what works best with this? What is the meta? What is that?
analytical
It's a
people
back and
being
forth.
very analytical.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
and
As you can see, there's a lot of them. Which,
every player.
There is that things like story and concept art, right, are things that consumers are used to seeing ahead of the drop of the actual product, right? We get all those amazing documentaries. I think everybody who considers themselves a fan of Star Wars has geeked out about seeing under the hood of Lucasfilm through all the different ways that they went through all the kind of evolutions of cinematography over there in the 70s and 80s and everything else. Like we've all been groomed to see that content and understand that is the ramp up to an intellectual property.
Sure.
So it felt like it was something we could share, right? That had a certain intuitiveness. You didn't have to be a Heroscaper yet. You could also appreciate it if you were a hardcore scaper, and everything in between. So it was an easy choice to make, to share those things, because they're a little easier for, I think, everybody to kind of ingest, so to speak.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it was a little bit of a fact-finding mission, Joe. To your point earlier, of a lot of people come into Heroscape and they endear themselves to different genres, different subject matter. Some of them love fantasy, some of them love historical, some of them love the sci-fi. They kind of mix and match on personal preferences, right? The idea that Heroscape was kind of a little bit of everything, right? It was the same was true when we were concepting out the idea of bringing these factions in as kind of the relaunch of the brand to kind of start here. And the kind of order of the day was how broad can we kind of cast that range, right? Can we do something that feels like it might appeal to a demographic that kind of has these likes and interests and is into this kind of entertainment, and now let's find a different wedge, but a totally different sensibility, a different kind of set of interests. And so it was intended to kind of round out a lot of different kind of little sub demographics, so that we could hopefully make sure that we produce something for everybody, right? And that's why it kind of it did that very thing, because we considered that kind of part of Heroscape's DNA, that it's intentionally broad in its genre by design.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you how many people were like, "Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this, but this one's okay." Like there was so many times where like they didn't like everything, but there was some times where like, "Oh, I don't like any of this, but actually this one is okay." Like it was funny that it touched a lot of different bases, and not every faction is every person's favorite, but there are some, like that are like, this is, oh man, this was my favorite. Like I enjoyed it when they dropped, and I still enjoy it to this day, and it's my favorite, So that was really cool that we were able to see that, and then just the different themes that the factions provided, and one of those themes being like the tie to the OG classic Heroscape with the Dawn Raider Syndicate, and that was the first one that dropped. That was, what sparked our imagination at first. We were like, oh wow, this one follows. It said that they follow Jandar, but now they're in the Dawn Raider faction. Like how is that possible? And just introducing those new mechanics with the captains and just the squads that are coming with them. It was just really cool to see that, as the leading, lore that you guys went in with. And then that's not even my favorite faction. Mine is the Giant Lifeborn Order. So that even then is like that started off, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I like that. But I was super excited to see what you guys had in store, and you guys, didn't disappoint. So to your point, that was really cool that you incorporated such a broad range of potential interests.
No, we totally expected that fans were going to like some factions and not like others, right? Mm-hmm. It's the simple reality of the fact that we don't all drive white cars, right?
Right.
Everybody's got their own tastes. Everybody's got their own preferences. If everybody drove the same white car, it'd be a kind of boring world. So totally expected fans to like some and dislike others, and that's probably true of just about every piece of entertainment and material that I think most modern fan consumers kind of look at. And Dawn Raider Syndicate was intentionally the first one I revealed because it did have within it that very subtle nod to the Heroscapers community to say, look, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. The species that the miniatures that you still have kind of stored away in that Rubbermaid in the back of the closet, those are still viable. Those are still real. Those are still part of the universe. We're not going to reboot and kind of throw everything you love about Heroscape away. And Dawn Raiders was designed to give that nod, to authenticate that for any player who was kind of a little nervous about that prospect. And so it was intentionally the first one out because I wanted to say that very quickly to the community, and that's why it was intentionally the first one.
Sure.
Very nice. And I'm just going to catch up with some comments and questions here on the live comment chat here. Again, thanks everybody for doing some live questions here. And Undamp Pick, I'll get to yours in a second, but first I want to ask Sarge BTP. Thank you for joining the stream, Sarge. Asks, beyond a Discord, what other sources of direct communication are being utilized? Most of the information I've seen have been secondhand screenshots from Discord.
Yeah, well, Discord, like I was mentioning earlier, is intentionally our direct access, direct communication pipeline. Right, and it's a little bit of a test and learn. Like I said, it's something Hasbro has never done before. So it created one good tool to have good conversation. Now, granted, I get it. Not everybody likes Discord. Not everybody is a fan of the way the chats work and how quickly it can kind of spiral out if everybody's talking. But it does provide us a really easy, direct form of communication, and it is the modern forum. I mean, HTML forums, are not something that the next generation is really looking for. So Discord made a lot of sense to us. It was an opportunity to do just that. Now that doesn't mean it's our only tool. Avalon Hill has a Twitter feed and some other forms of social media, Instagram posts and everything else that Avalon Bill kind of makes sure as the community manager, he's constantly kind of pumping things out through that. And then Hasbro Pulse as a communication feed is, another super essential tool to this whole process right now, being that it's a HasLab item. And that's actually run by another team that's not something Avalon Hill actually runs or manages within Hasbro. That's a whole separate Hasbro Pulse team that is responsible with their own kind of marketing team, with their own web designers, things like that. Now, we have conversations probably daily with them, and I know Patrick probably has conversations with them hourly. But in the massive bureaucracy of Hasbro, that Hasbro Pulse functions as another team that we leverage in this specific example.
Okay. And for those of you watching on YouTube, the links in the description below. There'll be links to all those places. Hopefully, I'll get all of them, but they should be down there in the YouTube description. Okay, Undamp Pick and Jason. This might I know you had a couple of questions. This question Undamp Pick says might also fall in line with yours, so you can ask yours right after this. Says this is talking about another game. Asking you, Chris, is there any talk about Avalon Hill bringing back the game Gettysburg? I know it was a favorite of Gary Gygax and would love to add it to my collection.
That's funny. One of the games I left off from my childhood was actually that I had the Milton Bradley, the United States American Civil War, which was like a map of the United States that was kind of parsed out based on kind of the cartography of the United States during the Civil War. And there was like this huge amount of miniatures for the Union and the Confederacy kind of baked in that game. And so that was one of the first times where I sat there, I had no idea how to play that game. The rulebook had long since disappeared. It was something my dad owned when he was a teenager. And I made up games with all those miniatures in this map. And it's funny because I made that argument when we brought Risk kind of back to the table as something we could ideate on. I said, to me, Risk functions as almost like the Unreal Engine of board games. Like, if you give somebody a map, miniatures, and a dice, right, you can make just about any game you can possibly imagine. And so I made the argument. I'm like, Risk has the opportunity to be just about anything you want it to, because it has these kind of fundamentals in its componentry that allow you to do that. As far as the historical material that kind of lives within the vault of Avalon Hill, such as Gettysburg, the challenge we face as a team is that Hasbro is a global company, and to ensure the viability of a product in our line plan, we have to make sure that that product is viable across regions. And so that starts to very quickly narrow the funnel and create a lot of filters on conversations such as Gettysburg, right? Because can we sell Gettysburg in Europe? Can we sell it in South America? Can we sell it in Australia? Does somebody in Australia care to play American Civil War, the board game? And when you can't necessarily get the backing and the support of your larger regional partners across the globe, it makes the sell-in very, very difficult on some of those games. Does that mean we'll never make them? No. And I think everybody has heard the announcement recently that we made with Renegade Games bringing back things like Diplomacy and Axis and Allies for us as licensed games, because that way we don't have to necessarily work in that kind of global scale. We can work to a tighter demographic, a tighter community, and bring back some of the things that those communities have been asking for a while, without some of that kind of restraint that we would get at the kind of Avalon Hill Hasbro level. And that's why we made the decision to partner with Renegade Games and license out a couple of those games so that they could do just that. That as that relationship matures and as we see how that goes and what kind of success we kind of witness in the process, that opens the door for games like Gettysburg. If that becomes one of the games that gets up there at a level and people say, that's the next one that, Renegade should be begging Avalon Hill to license, then we'll figure it out when we get there.
Okay. And I'll throw it to Jason, because I know he had a couple questions related to different games as well. So go ahead and take your shot, Jason.
So on the topic of Milton Bradley and the various properties they had back then, alongside Heroscape, we had the game Battle Masters, which I know was a childhood game I had. And one I never got to play because of the UK only release was Space Crusade, which I guess was like the 40k sci-fi version of HeroQuest. Do you guys have the license to produce those, and got any thoughts about those two games maybe in the future?
So Doug Hopkins, who is one of my product designers at Avalon Hill, he works on HeroQuest. Doug and I were in a local flag store several months ago, and there was a used complete copy of Battle Masters. So of course we purchased the copy because we didn't have a good copy in the office. It had long since been pilfered and there were miniatures missing, and it made it really hard to play. But it was really funny because Doug brought it back to the office the next day, cracked it open, and him and Craig spread the whole thing out. And the way the Battle Masters board is, it's essentially a twister mat, right? It's that big. Wow. So you're basically letting a twister mat out and playing like giant, like head-to-head kind of medieval kind of cavalry combat across this kind of twister mat. So the two of them, spent a couple hours in kind of purview to the public community in the middle of Hasbro with this twister mat covered in cavalry, going at it. And they had managed to build a crowd around them over that time, kind of witnessing this thing unfold. And it gave us a lot of good conversation, a lot of what ifs, right? And that probably answers the question of whether or not we would have the ability to bring it back, right? There would probably be some nuances in terms of making sure, our partners at GW were happy with any kind of separation of IP. There was a lot of kind of multi-purpose kind of iconography on some of the battle standards and stuff, or Chaos Warriors that might look a little too Chaos Warrior in the original Battle Masters. But it's a conversation we've had. It's a conversation we have. It's a cool game. It's a lot of fun. It's great to line up absolute legions of miniatures and just smash them to bits in a very short order. Space Crusade is a lot trickier. Space Crusade is the yin to the HeroQuest yang, so to speak. They're both developed by Stephen Baker, who at the time was at GW. Stephen then came over to Hasbro. I know Steve very well. He's amazing. He does the voiceovers for the HeroQuest lore videos that you see on YouTube. So Steve is an amazing fellow. He did a lot of great work back there in the late 80s and early 90s for those games. The problem with Space Crusade is that it has a considerable amount of Warhammer 40,000 IP baked into it, right? It was a lot easier to extract HeroQuest out of the old world of Warhammer Fantasy. And it's something that I've been I work in the background doing kind of as we kind of progress and develop linear story behind HeroQuest going forward, is to kind of keep kind of unraveling the Warhammer out of HeroQuest and letting that go die in a deep hole somewhere, so that Games Workshop can own their intellectual property fairly. It's a lot harder to do on Space Crusade. There's so much to that game that is reliant on Space Marines and the Adeptus Astartes. The Tyranids are the Tyranids in that game. I mean, it is very, very steeped in Warhammer 40,000 lore, and it makes it really hard. It would be probably easier to say something like, what we would make a game that would function as a HeroQuest adjacent game system, but would occur in space, than to actually bring back Space Crusade. And really, for that reason, that the intellectual property is completely interwoven in every aspect of that box.
Kind of along the topic of untangling the GW IP property, I got kind of a fun question. I don't know if you may want to comment on or not, because as you mentioned, when you re-released HeroQuest, you had to get rid of the old GW stuff, which included this guy right here, which is the Firmer, which is one of the old GW monsters.
Very
correct. You replaced them with the Abomination, which we can kind of generically call a fish person. Now, there's an ongoing meme on the Warhammer Twitch channel about fish people being the next Warhammer army. Any chance, are you trolling GW with this particular miniature by replacing their IP property? No,
but we do have great relationships with some of the members of Games Workshop, and there's probably an opportunity at some point to make that joke with them. That's kind of funny. But yeah, the Femere was something that for multiple reasons, Avalon Hill wanted nothing to do with. Its kind of story in and of itself is quite cringe, so that was kind of easy to walk away from.
Okay, that's all I've got, Ryan. So thanks for answering that.
Yeah, and to like another like fluff type subject, because this is, some people might be in the back of their heads, or and we've asked this, or I've asked this before, but let's see if we can get an answer tonight. The name Encarmine. We want to know the background story of this, because you said it'd take some time. We got time, so why don't you give us a discussion on this, Chris? Huh?
My first fully painted Warhammer 40,000 army was actually Blood Angels, and I believe that was 3rd edition, when we introduced Dante and Mephiston and Cthulhu, and we started to have those characters behind the Blood Angels. That codex was amazing. I think I traced and copied and redrew just about every piece of art in that codex when it came out. And I had a fully painted Blood Angel army. It was like the pride of my collection. especially as like a young teenager who, had my own kind of pile of, gray plastic shame. And that was the first time they really started to talk a little bit more in depth about things like successor chapters. And there was a successor chapter in that book called The Angels of Encarmine, which literally had like 2 sentences that described them. And they were just raging lunatics, which was like a level up from most Blood Angels, kind of understanding their lore. And I didn't paint my army Angels Encarmine, but that story of them being even kind of a level above the unbridled fury of the Blood Angels kind of stuck with me for a little bit. And I had this wonderful episode that involved a high school sweetheart, and I was absolutely furious and like raging over this problem. And I think at that point I became an alpha tester for Xbox Live. I was one of the first 5,000 people that won the contest to try out Xbox Live.
Nice.
And so I was able to put a gamer tag in before the rest of the world got to. And so I used that name. I brought Encarmine into that alpha test for Xbox Live. And the next thing I know, I was using it on AOL. I was using it on everything. So it kind of stuck as my gamer tag. And I've been using it ever since, probably since about 93, 94. I've been using that name.
Nice.
So it's kind of never gone away. And it just kind of, I find it funny and amusing because I'm a big guy, and some, my wife and the kids always comment a little bit that, when I get upset, my face turns red. So it's always been very relevant for me. And been a cool little, subtle little username that's kind of had multiple histories all through time. So if the community happens to see an Encarmine, on a Blizzard server or an Xbox server or anything like that, it more than likely you might know who's behind that gamer tag over there. So
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, everybody take notice.
It's not hard to find. It's probably easy to figure out my Outlook email and whatnot at that point. Like I said, it's probably been the same username I've used for a very long time in a lot of different places. So
Awesome.
That's awesome.
It's good to know that. All right, great. And let's get back into Age of Annihilation a bit. And I want to get into some more questions, unless you guys have any questions about, like the video last week and the gameplay stuff. You guys might have any questions?
Yeah, I just want, now that you bring up the gameplay, I want to say this when we were talking about gameplay, but I didn't want to just keep harking on, that specific video, because that was a really awesome video that you guys put out. Yep. Being a YouTuber that does Heroscape battles, it was really cool to see you guys battling and having fun and enjoying, and hearing Craig's laugh every time. So that was incredible for me. I really enjoyed that. But leading into that, it was funny because I've been avoiding the Heroscapers Facebook group, or even sometimes the Discord, just because of the negativity that's going around. And one of the biggest things that kind of irked me in the beginning was, oh, this doesn't feel like Heroscape. This doesn't look like Heroscape. It doesn't, like you were saying, it doesn't smell like Heroscape, doesn't taste like Heroscape. But that video, to me, in my opinion, silenced a lot of those complaints, because this felt like Heroscape. When I could create parallels from the characters that you guys made to existing characters, that made me really excited and made me really oh wow, this is awesome. I can use Sir Gilbert to dispatch some Frostclaws, and that'll help with their movement. They only have 3 movement, and they could do the run movement, but if he could dispatch some Frostclaws, that's awesome. That's amazing. And then just seeing all of their synergies and how they Jeremy was talking about earlier, how they can relate to the OG Heroscape. It was just awesome seeing that. I love the knights, and so it was cool to see some bear knights. That was awesome. And then to see the actual powers activate, how you actually got the the parasite to trigger. Like that was so cool that we got to see that on screen, and it just put a lot of, even honestly, doubts that I was having in my own head. Is it going to play here like Heroscape? Is it going to battle like Heroscape? And it did. And I knew you guys knew it would. There was, like you said, so much work that went into that, but it was really good to finally see it, this new age of Annihilation and how it really did play and feel like Heroscape. And even one side note is the Knight Primus, just him, he's almost like a new Grimnack, where he can go and pretty much chomp a squad figure. And so I was like, that's really cool. Like they're almost like a nod to classic Heroscape, but it's its own brand new thing. And being that these squads now, some of them will have multiple life, like that's also something. It's a nod to the Heroscape with the squads, but it's also something brand new and bring a different mechanic that people are honestly going to have to play around. Like that is a mechanic that's almost game changing. And so to see that play out on camera too was just awesome. I just really want to thank you guys for putting that up there. And I don't know if you guys were planning on doing that before, but it feels like, you guys really listened to the community and you saw what we wanted and you had your own plans. You weren't planning on releasing the cards, like you said, till they were ready. You guys felt like they were ready and that was the perfect time to do it and the perfect way to do it. Like it was awesome. So thanks for that.
We have been chasing that video for a couple weeks. We had produced one fully printed, 3D printed set of all the characters in the game, and that started a roadshow. It went through several executive and investor meetings. It then found its way to New York Comic Con. It was the one set we had for internal play testing, and it got immediately kind of shipped out as the shiny penny. The minute everybody saw it, it was get this thing out there. And so that was the day it came back finally from New York Comic Con.
Wow.
Was the day, the box showed up on the table in my office, and Patrick and I, we haven't had a chance to really crunch and kind of grok the cards very much. We've relied heavily on the War Council to do that, which is a little atypical for Patrick and I. Him and I tend to play test till we're sick of looking at the game, but we haven't had that with Heroscape because we've brought in this War Council to do so much of that work. So when those came back, we were like, Craig, give us like the newest versions of those cards. We want to play with what they've been testing the last couple of weeks. We want to see it. We want to do it. So it was actually a very authentic kind of moment because that was our first time.
Yeah.
Those particular powers, they had some of those characters have evolved so much over time that they don't even resemble like previous versions of them.
Wow.
So it was our first time getting to play that. So we were on camera literally stumbling through that, and that was one take, no editing.
Yeah.
Awesome. When the festering honor guard kind of burst out of Adelburn's chest, that was like, we couldn't have planned this any better, right?
He was full life, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah, it was pretty cool. So it was great to do in front of the camera because it was a very sincere moment for Patrick and I. We hadn't got our hands on that in a while. So that was really fun. So now that the set is back with us, now it's been a question of, okay, what do we do with that set now, and how we can continue to leverage it. And unfortunately, the componentry to Vanguard Edition is so intense, and there's so many pieces. It takes like 2 weeks to 3D print that game.
Oh wow.
Jeez.
And when you think about our model shop at Hasbro and what 2 weeks would mean to the model shop, and how many other brands also are elbowing their way in there to print action figures and the like, it can be hard, right? So it's easier for us to go in there and say, hey, look, coming out of New York Comic Con, these 8 figures shattered, broke. lost their swords, their heads, and everything else? Can we reprint in those 8 figures? That's manageable. Going in there and saying, hey, can you reprint these,
71
and all this terrain again, will probably make the model shop implode. So we're trying to be pretty savvy and careful. And while this is going on, we are printing what is essentially kind of a second set, so to speak, in that the way our sculpting process works, when we get after our sculpting team does a first pass of actually changing the turns you guys saw on Discord into a viable sculpt, what we do is we grow that sculpt in the model shop to hold it in our hands to confirm the proportions, the feel, the angle, the posture, the scaling. All of that happens still analog by holding a miniature in your hands. And so you start to make comments on that sculpt. Hey, can we shrink the head? Can we grow it another millimeter taller? It looks kind of short. This leg is in a weird position. All of that stuff continues to happen in the background with this other kind of set of 3D prints that we have to do as part of our process to prep those for tooling. Because the plan is on November 15th, when this funds, it triggers a milestone at Hasbro called the tool start, which means all of those files batch up. They are with the factory. We greenlight it and they cut steel. And the plan on the calendar is that will happen on November 15th to ensure that everybody gets their copy before the end of next year. So in order to do that, we have to be doing the affirmations, the confirmations, the refinements to all of those sculpts while the campaign is happening. That's all happening on a daily basis. So if there was a question of whether or not, we all kind of pause and wait for the campaign, that's, out of scope for the way the team has to work. And that, that's our confidence in the project that, there's still, the team is still going in every single day, all day, and working as if this is going to happen on November 15th, and everything will be prepared for that. And that includes the way those sculpts are kind of refined for final production.
And for like the crowdfunding campaign itself, because you mentioned some things about it, what do you think is like aside from what's already been mentioned, what's some of the most challenging parts of moving through this campaign, or even getting started with it, moving through it?
I think Patrick has mentioned it several times that the data of a Avalon Hill board game, we don't have a lot of it, right? And especially compared to how a HasLab campaign runs. They do run differently than a Kickstarter. The way the marketing support functions, the way the website functions, it's all very different than, a standard Kickstarter model. So the data is a little wonky compared to if you tried to just line it up perfectly with a Kickstarter. So it means like Patrick in particular is probably in this weird rabbit hole on a daily basis where he's trying to crunch those numbers and almost document the historical kind of a breakdown of how this is going, so that he has that data for the future and can kind of each day more confidently predict how this thing is going. But because it's ours, because it's within the confines of kind of Hasbro proper, it gives us potential tools we can leverage to ensure its success, right? And that's an ongoing process in terms of other ways we want to gain awareness and reach out and and get information into the hands of demographics that maybe haven't been yet exposed to the HasLab. All of that is within our ability to do because it's ours. Where that might be a little bit more troubling on a Kickstarter that has those kind of plateaus in the middle of their timelines. But we're still 30 days out. I think we're a little over a third now. So I mean, and there's still a lot of plans to keep getting the word out, to keep supporting it, to produce other things that are going to pique interest and produce opportunity. So we're just gonna keep at it.
For sure. And I know there was like some comments we had on Matthias Maccabees and OEAO Mike last week, discussing some of their comments that they did in their own podcast, Casters of Valhalla, and like about the presentation of the HasLab site. Just describe, if you could describe a little bit of that process, what it's like to, because you're interacting with Hasbro, right, to try and present a good page as possible. Just describe some of that process to us, if you can.
Yeah, well, I'll say, I mentioned earlier that Hasbro Pulse is not necessarily run by Avalon Hill. It's a different entity within the building with their own web designers, and you'll notice if you kind of flip in and out of multiple Kickstarters, multiple pre-orders, you'll notice that there's some grid templating happening there. There's some standard best practices that they employ, and that makes it hard for Avalon Hill because their bread and butter, they're by far their most popular stuff on that website is the action figure business. Action figure businesses that tend to have very heavily supported entertainment, huge brand awareness. And for the most part, you're merely celebrating what is a pretty intuitive play experience with an action figure. I mean, most collectors at this point know how a 6-inch action figure tends to function. So there isn't a lot of heavy lifting that has to go into Hasbro Pulse in terms of explaining the play features or explaining the experience. That makes it really hard on Avalon Hill because you need those other layers of how the game actually functions, and how that works. And kind of out of the gate, we knew we were focusing on existing Heroscape players. So when you kind of combine those two perfect storms together, you kind of produce what feels like a website that isn't explaining how the game is played, right? That became an easy and obvious thing to kind of for us to point at internally, as we were starting to watch the numbers and say, okay, that's some place we can improve. It's definitely something that we're getting consumer feedback on. It's definitely something we know is not something we have necessarily done as kind of Hasbro Pulse in the past. So how do we continue to refine that and make it a better experience? And stay tuned. Absolutely. I've mentioned a few times that there's a lot of things in the works. So I wouldn't expect that would stay the way it is very much longer.
Okay. And let's I want to catch up again with comments because we're getting comments on the live chat here. Let me see here. Undamp Pick is just giving his comment saying, I was initially shocked by the price, but considering it's not 2004 and we're getting twice, I actually think almost 3 times the amount of units from any of the master sets, I've come around. I once said I'd do anything to get Heroscape back. I've backed 3 sets, 1 to play out of the box, 1 to paint, and 1 to keep sealed. And Undamp Pick, we salute you for doing that for sure. Let's see here. It also says Undamp Pick also says, along with my Heroscape, my favorite board game as a kid was Milton Bradley's Battle Ball. I love the minis and all the dice. Wish that there were more than 2 teams. Let's see here. Sarge BTP says more videos that show gameplay. Video for sure. So yeah, I think a lot of people like the gameplay video. Undead Pick also says gameplay videos are definitely a great way to showcase the new figures. Knight Primus Adelburn needs another go around though. He perished too early. Well, that's, you can just don't mess with the queen.
Say that again.
Don't mess with the queen. See, Undead Pick also says, I'd love to see more of the Clockwork Combine in action. Also says, can we please see Air Marshal Zed Nesbitt and the Glide Strikers in action? Yeah, I'd look forward to see that. And he also says, we are just under a third of the way, 2,601 to 8,000 with 30 days left. Yep, for sure, absolutely. And now let's get into, because a lot of things we talk about in this podcast is lore and lore within the game. So let's just dive into that a little bit. If you guys have no other game mechanics or gameplay questions.
No, let's do it.
Yeah, and so how about we just go back, rewind back a little bit to the beginning when it came to restarting Heroscape. What kind of time and effort went into thinking, okay, there's some lore we can use, there's some lore that's really confusing, where do we go from here? How do we build this back up and expand it?
Oh, we might need a whole other video for this.
We probably will, and it's more reason for you to come back, Chris.
I think early on, very early on, I tend to be the lore IP brand story person on the team, right? Coming from my background on the entertainment businesses, coming from an art background, and being, new to some things associated with kind of product design, it was a place very early on that I could sink my teeth into. So, right out of the gate, I wanted to get into the lore on Heroscape and really start to build that up, because it felt like it was something. It felt like there was a lot of ownable little things in there that we could really grow over time. So Craig came in one day and his plan was he was gonna explain to me the world of Heroscape. And he brought in a bunch of Xerox printouts from the color printer down the hallway, and it was all the synergy charts of all the characters. Like, this one bonds with this one, that gives synergy to this one, and this power links up with this one. And that's where he started in explaining the world to me. And my brain fried as he put these things in front of me, because A, they didn't translate at all, not being an original Heroscape player, and B, I was like, how does this have anything to do with the story of Heroscape? He's trying to use these visual cues to explain them to me, and I can see the frustration on his face, because it all makes perfect sense to Craig. Yeah, and I'm just glossing over, and I think my eyes are crossing. So that triggered me turning it into the everyday at 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m. cup of coffee. I would, I got a hold of all the Thorman's journals. I got a hold of the comic books. I got a hold of the fan-made compendium. I, got on a lot of the Heroscapers forum and fandom.com and all that stuff, and was just reading, and I was just
sorry about that site. That's still in the work.
And just chip away at that story a little bit. And what I found very quickly was there was a lot of contradictions. Yeah. That there was a lot of on page 4 it says go left, but clearly on page 9 it says that they went right. And just sitting there trying to take notes, I have a notebook in the office. It would be fun to show you guys someday. Oh yeah. This chicken scratch of me trying to pull things apart and put them back together. And it was hard. It was real hard. I would go back over to Craig and be like, Craig, help explain to me again what happened between these two Thorman entries, and he'd have to tell me about how he was writing them early on, and then somebody else on the team was writing them in the middle, and then they hired somebody at the end, and the tone of voice is changing, and people are taking artistic freedom, and so all these things are kind of happening. And in the meantime, there were all these little weird activations kind of happening at Hasbro, these webisodes and this stuff they were doing to kind of cross-sell new waves, and it would gratuitously drop character names into the text, and it would read like an Ovaltine radio ad from 1957. So I kind of broke all that apart, and where I got stuck, where I found myself initially trapped, was on the prophecy of the 15 wellsprings and the 15 amulets, right? I ended up drawing an infographic for myself, and that became this kind of source of truth for me for a moment. that there was enough material in that prophecy that if you could drive everything kind of back to it for a moment, you could use that as the kind of North Star of the overarching story. And that turned into a very Tolkien moment where I stopped everything that I was doing and I decided to go try to figure out the history of the Kyrie. Right? That it never felt like the backstory of how we got in the war in the first place was ever clearly explained. That we were just there one day and we were just killing each other on the battlefield of Valhalla, and all this eclectic mix of monsters and heroes and villains and creatures from across time and space just all get sucked into Valhalla. There's a giant war happening, and I have no emotional connection to why I care about this war. And it all kind of kept going back to this idea of the indigenous population of the planet, that these angelic creatures known as Kyrie, and somewhere, somehow, within their culture, within their timeline, they ultimately had a major role in this thing kind of falling apart. And so I spent a lot of time kind of figuring out their history, their backstory, how they would get to that point, right? Why the Valkyrie kind of coming into being would be so detrimental to their species and would trigger this epic kind of war. And that, as I kind of connected those two things, this idea of this prophecy and this planet with these well springs that had a finite number of well springs in theory, that it started to piece together a pretty good narrative that I could get my head around. And so at that point, I had a lot of just ideas and a lot of existing material that multiple people over time, whether it was Craig, whether it was other members of the Hasbro gaming community over the years, whether it was Wizards of the Coast. At the time, ironically, there was a team called HasLab, which was actually responsible for world building. So they had done a lot of that stuff, like the comic book. So you had so many different people kind of throwing in on this idea of building out this IP, and it created a lot of contradictions. It created multiple tones of voice. It created all these kind of side stories, which got really cumbersome too, especially as someone new coming on, going down these rabbit holes of narrative, but they're actually about this very obscure element of the brand and not necessarily kind of the core kind of main story arc. So that was when I called Ryder Winham. Ryder is one of the writers for the expanded universe for Lucasfilm. And Ryder is one of the team at Lucas who are like the lore gurus, right? They have, there's this crazy thing that happens at Lucasfilm where if you're starting something new, right? There are these people who join the conversation that come into the meeting room, right? And they introduce each other by name, and you shake hands, and and they kind of sit at the far end of the table. And as you start to get into like a business discussion, right? And it happened with we did that line of Forces of Destiny, and it happened there, and that's why I remember it. We would start talking about things like a narrative arc where Padme and Leia could interact or something. And then they'd be like, no, that's impossible. She dies before she's, they only know each other in the birthing room kind of thing. And then we'd be all right, what about Ahsoka and Leia? And they'd go through this. And then you see these people like sitting there, like scratching their chins and thinking and doing the math in their head of like where everybody is in the universe at that given moment and whether it's even possible. And so that team helps maintain like all the behind the scenes off camera story of Star Wars, so that all these partners and all these creatives can play in the sandbox of Star Wars, but that there's certain fundamental truths that are adhered to because of this team. And so Ryder is very much kind of wired into that community. So I was like, Ryder, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to take this giant pile of chicken scratch that I have, and I want you to tell me how broken this is. I want you to tell me where it does make sense and where it doesn't. And that was a 6-month process between Ryder and I. We spent 6 months ripping apart Heroscape and putting it back together again. And that has ultimately produced a document that we tend to call in the industry a brand Bible that kind of has the truths. It has the sandbox, right? Here's the stuff that is this brand and this story. It breaks it down into settings and kind of MacGuffins and characters, and it kind of organizes it. But it highlighted a lot of contradictions, whether it was a contradiction in story timeline or a contradiction in this person claims they did it, but this person also claims they did it. There's even contradictions on the map, because you'll have a pinpoint on a map that'll locate a certain city, but in the verbal description somewhere else it's actually located on the coast, right? And so there's all these little funky things that kind of happen there. So we spent 6 months kind of organizing that into something that we could use going forward, right? And the reality is that I think what we're producing is going to be a story that everybody can understand and everybody can appreciate, and that as kind of people who are really endeared to the lore of Heroscape, I think you'll recognize it, you'll feel good about it, and it'll feel like it's moving forward. I think the hard part there will be things that we just don't talk about right now, because for whatever reason they're broken in the storyline. And I know there's a huge community that asks about Valkyrie, right? Yeah. But Valkyrie is a really interesting subject because he's a manufactured Valkyrie in theory, right? It takes away the importance of the Wellsprings to say that you could just manufacture these demigod Valkyrie, right? It makes the power of the Wellsprings feel lesser, and the import of those Valkyries feel null, because you could always just build it in a lab. And so even though it was a great story at the time and people are endeared to the concept of Valkyrie as a Valkyrie kind of breaks all the other important things in your story by being who he is. So there's these things in there that we have to decide, do they make sense for a good story in the 21st century? That the way we've all kind of matured as fans to what a good story is, especially now that the game is not necessarily geared to the kid at Toys R Us, but it's now geared towards the adult. It should have the sensibilities of being an adult level story. And that means that some of those things that we're endeared to, some of those things that are nostalgic, they might just be story arcs that we don't focus on. And that's kind of on, I guess, how a lot of common Hollywood reboot might work at times, if you really think about it. You think about some of the other entertainment that you've loved over the years, and when a new director, a new showrunner, a new team comes on board, it's still the story it's still the characters but there might be something from the previous era of that entertainment that just isn't spoken to anymore, does get retconned because it doesn't make sense in the story any longer.
That process, yeah. And so when it comes to the creation of the new Valkyrie generals that we know going to show up now that have been mentioned, what was the process of creating those names and the personalities and such?
I think I came up with Revenant and Valaric in the scope of one morning. They were very quick. We knew we wanted new Valkyrie. It was part of a group of bullet points that represented raising the stakes and expanding the war. And so as we said this was going to be this Age of Annihilation, and what did Age of Annihilation mean, right? One of the things that was spoken to was the idea that the previous campaigns, like Swarm of the Morrow, were very focused geographically, right? It was a very tight narrative happening in a very tight place in a very in a kind of corner of the world. And so one of the first things I wanted to do was expand where the war was happening. I wanted it to feel like you couldn't escape it, that it was all over the continent. And in order to do that, you needed enough Valkyrie to be campaigning in multiple places at once. That it was hard to nail down the battle lines, the where the actual kind of battle was taking place, because there was so many happening that it just felt scattered. And that felt very chaotic, and it felt very dangerous to allow that to happen across the continent. And so more Valkyrie gave us that chance. The other thing is, I never, when I got a chance to really get a little deeper into it, I didn't like the idea that for the most part all of the Valkyrie had teamed up against Utgar. That it felt very antiquated in this logic of this kind of group of good aligned characters all against the big bad. That didn't feel like modern storytelling either. And so I wanted to break that up a little bit. I wanted to balance the sides. And so Revna was the obvious first one to integrate, because I wanted to introduce more evil aligned Valkyrie into the mix, so that it didn't quite feel like everybody against Utgar anymore. And that would also allow us to do more with characters like Utgar, because instead of him being kind of superficially just absolute evil and all the standard archetypes, it means you can start playing with some shades of gray, right? And that's important too, because again, it felt like a very antiquated model, especially with Utgar and Jandar. So Revna was the first given, and with the idea that Aquila was really the first female Valkyrie in the original era, again, it felt very unbalanced in terms of gender. So it was very easy to pinpoint Revna for being female as well. But that turned into a cool exercise in how do you break kind of gender norms and things like that. So having her be very, very, very much more aggressive than Utgar, much more brash in her strategies, much more kind of barbaric in her style, right? And so that started to influence things like the Nemesis Warbrood and the Ironclad Collective, feeling less like these calculated kind of battle styles, and more like charging just into the battle and just destroying everything in their path, because it felt very Revna to do that. So she was starting to influence those factions at that point. The other thing I really liked was that Thorman had this ability for precognition, that he seemed to represent a competitive advantage for the good Valkyrie by agreeing to help them at a certain point. I wanted to give that same ability to the other side of the equation, and so making her into this kind of witch seer, that she herself would be able to see into the future. She would have precognition as an ability, would also kind of tip the balance and kind of change things up a little bit. So that was a lot of what went into kind of how Revna came into being, the kind of core pillars of where she started from. And then you're going to find out that her origin and her place on the map also kind of broadens out the map too. Right? There's a hint in there if you go look at the components list on the PDP.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeremy. Go ahead.
So I noticed that you did mention on the website, the HasLab website, it's Lauer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually doing some, I guess I could form this in a form of a question, but I was actually doing some like post research. I was reading into it, and Lauer and Nastralund have a place called the Dark Lakes, and they were talking about that being the possible origin of the Wellsprings. And it's like, this is like old Rise of the Valkyrie lore, and I don't think anyone ever really expounded on that. So it made me wonder, is Revna pursuing this potential origin of the Wellsprings in Lour? Because that would
you're catching some of the stuff I'm throwing. You can see what happens when I spent 6 months kind of digging into this whole thing.
I was reading it, and then I was like, origin of the Wellsprings. So that makes sense. I mean, obviously you would want to go look into that if that's a plus up on your war. So yeah, I was like, I see what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm having some fun, especially with things that that have existed but have never been spoken to, right? Like the other one is the idea that I've mentioned that Valaric is from Hawkland, right?
Yeah.
We've all seen that island on the map forever, right? It's been this distant, subcontinent in the kind of northeast of the map for a long time, but it's never had a place in most existing kind of campaigns or stories or anything like that, unless somebody's homebrewing something fun. So that would became the trigger for Valaric's personality, right? That if she was a Valkyrie that had existed on the subcontinent, she wouldn't have been involved in the early parts of the war because she was so physically detached from what was happening. It didn't mean that she didn't at some point drink from a wellspring and become a Valkyrie. Just meant that the war was a distant thing for her. And if she didn't immediately act and she didn't kind of jump into the war earlier, and why became a question. And that started to create her personality as the pragmatist and the prepper and the overly thoughtful general who is going to prepare her troops and arm her troops and use those powers of the Wellspring to ensure that when she does take the battlefield, she takes it, almost guaranteeing victory. And so that created a very interesting personality for her too, because she isn't the rash one. She's the opposite of Revna, right? She's the overly thoughtful one. She's the one who doesn't want to commit her troops, doesn't want to lose a single soldier on the battlefield. And it creates a very different personality. And so that started to, that Hawkland Island, looking at that thing in the top corner of the map, started to create her. Why would she have not been here? Why would she have not joined? And the idea is that if there are 15 Wellsprings, there are probably 15 Valkyrie, right? That that if the Wellspring, if a major Wellspring is capable of triggering the effects of the transformation into a Valkyrie and bestowing that kind of demigod mantle onto a Kyrie, that in theory there's 15 moments in the story where that will take place. Right, and so we still have quite a bit of room, quite a bit of runway to tell more story and continue to grow that. And I say major Wellspring, and I mentioned this, I think, at some point on the Discord. Yeah. Because what I found, again, in the contradictions of the story was that there were certain other locations that didn't have a Wellspring marked on them, but it had mentioned in the story that they had been used for certain purposes, kind of accessing the water to do things like create magical weapons and things like that, but they were not actually Wellsprings on the map. And so that created a hypothetical of, are the Wellsprings connected? Are the reservoirs and the rivers of the Wellsprings moving underneath the earth? So that there is almost like a web across the planet where it has 15 major contact points, but for whatever reason, if that water was to kind of leak out of the crust, it would create these kind of minor locations where that water could be accessed, even if it wasn't a wellspring. And that started to create a deeper understanding of the build of the planet, right? Because now at this point, if you have these 15 essential kind of, the way it seems to be described, like man-made structures around naturally forming wellsprings. And if they do have this interconnectivity, and they do have this ability, this power of kind of raw energy of the universe capable of kind of translocating souls, people, things to its planet. Is it fabricated? Is there a history that predates the Kyrie? All of those things start to form. You start to create some of those theories, just on the simple fact that those things exist and they have a finite number. And that's why I said that prophecy became so important to building back up the sandbox.
And I think like one of the things that I was thinking too when you told us, like some lore theory about the Wellsprings early on, is that okay? Who flipped the switch? Then is it something that we haven't seen or haven't heard from yet? And so that's a question I always have in my mind. That I don't know if you even like have brainstormed that, or if that's still in the process of answering or not. But I know you already have like the dragon that we have is kind of like, and we discussed this. This is kind of like a dragon from like the creation of the universe, almost. So you're already going back in the past a little bit to that point. So I don't know how intertwined that gets within the story.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the historical miniatures concept for a second, right? And you recognize that you have this war occurring, but it's obviously drawing time and space. So you've got this eclectic mix of species from multiple planets, and you have these different time, kind of pockets of time that are pulling kind of the worthy to Valhalla. The only example we have that's kind of easily distinguishable is Earth, right? Because we can do the real world research to recognize, Tokugawa ninjas and Roman legionnaires and things like that. But that's not to say that that's not the same truth of all those other planets, right? We know some of those planets have, we know them by what might be their current dominant species, right? We know some of them to even be dead planets. We know some of them to be feral planets. That doesn't mean they were always that way. And so Zenithrax represented an easy way of kind of acknowledging that reality that maybe not everybody had really thought through, which was that there are other timelines to pull from on other planets that we probably haven't even scratched the surface on yet. And what does that look like? And so she was a great one to just kind of put out there, and start to spark that imagination with everybody. What do some of what is Mar before the Maru became dominant on it? Is there something there? I've kind of connected the concept of a wellspring equals a Valkyrie, but I've also kind of quietly connected the idea that opening a wellspring triggers access to a new planet. And so in that infographic, I also had each one of the wellsprings linked to one of the known planets from the first era. And when I opened up those 2 additional wellsprings introduced to Valkyrie, I put Arboreus and Noxdorma on the map, so to speak.
Wow.
Which then started to create also a finite set of planets connected to Valhalla, in theory, again, knowing that we haven't revealed them all. But it meant that those planets had history of their own. And so I linked 2 factions to one and 2 factions to the other. And it does create this weird head scratcher when you try to work through the idea that the Ironclad Collective and like the Clockwork Combine are fighting each other, right? Are they? Are they actually fighting each other? Did they ever fight each other? I don't think I ever said they were fighting each other. There's no reference in anything that actually says that the 2 of them ever met on a battlefield. Does that mean that they come from 2 different times on the same planet? And what does that mean? Right? Could that mean something like the Ironclad Collective are a future species on Noxdorma, but that would mean that the Clockwork Combine are extinct in the current timeline. You could very easily start to create narrative like that.
Wow, that's a big bomb.
Right? So it's all of those things to think about, and it doesn't matter on the world of Valhalla because you're pulling from time, right? And you can start to create this story of like, you know, the Clockwork Combine where these amazing heroes at a time on their planet where they were needed most, but it doesn't mean they survived. And the Valkyrie are recognizing how powerful and bold and courageous and those creatures were, but you know, they've long since been gone. So there's a lot to play with in Valhalla, and I have a lot of fun with Heroscape in terms of world building, because there's so much of that baked into it. It makes perfect sense from an IP standpoint, which is really, really fun too. And I've used that to explain the scalability of Heroscape to the executives. We've had meetings where they try to understand just how far Heroscape can go, what the potential of Heroscape is. And I use that example of like, just name anything you can think of off the top of your head, and I can tell you how it would work in the world of Heroscape, right? And I start joking with them. I've got them all to laugh. I'll be like, hey, if you want My Little Ponies and PJ Masks, we can put them in Heroscape. It makes perfect sense.
My son would love PJ Masks.
Right? And I'm like, the craziest thing is, technically speaking, whether or not it's a good idea or not, technically speaking, it actually works in the universe. And I'm like, so now think of the potential as, you know, we revisit conversations like the Marvel product that was, you know, all of that is possible in a world where anything is possible.
Someone like this coming week on Discord's gonna say, My Little Pony confirmed.
Yeah.
You know what I find interesting out of what you were saying, Chris, is the possibility of the different times and where they're coming from, because you look at Earth as the example, and you take where Sergeant Drake came from and where the Fourth Mass came from and where Agent Carr and all them. So it's like, yeah, it makes perfect sense of everything. But when you say about the Clockwork Combine and are they extinct at that time, or where it happened to them, and it's like, well, is it because they were gone? Was it because things happened and they were gone out of their existence? Like I like to give the example of the blip from the MCU. You know, everybody was snapped out of existence, and 5 years later they came back. Well, in this case, they ain't coming back. There's no coming back. They are trapped on Valhalla now. Is anyone even looking for a way home? There's a lot of good questions there.
Yeah, I've struggled with. I know there was a lot of conversation around Ular and the idea of bringing people back home from Valhalla, right? That had been invoked in some of the story, and in this idea of some ability to go back and forth. And I kind of squashed that in my mind, believing that traveling to Valhalla is a one-way street right now. Now, whether or not there is some epic, beautiful story at the end of all of this, but in my mind, this, the decision to draw that individual to Valhalla to fight in the war feels like it needs to have the weight, it needs to have the import, it needs to have the heaviness of, when this choice is made, this is serious, right? And so I've kind of gone through that process of saying, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that if you really want the weight of the moment to weigh on you, then it would be a one-way ticket to the war.
No, for sure. Yeah. I would love to be able to because of how much is there in Heroscape, and And I truly believe that because of how Heroscape is and how the storytelling and how everybody's on Valhalla, that there's so many stories you can branch out and so many different things. This game could just be way bigger than any other IP out there. I just truly believe that. And partially is because of that storytelling and how many different stories that there are that and could be told in so many different mediums. So when I would love to see that moment where if it's a Clockwork Combine, if it's a Trian, or if it's even another human character, and they're like, and maybe part of the Dawn Raiders, because they've taken themselves out of this war essentially and said, we're just doing our own thing. We're gonna be a whatever. There's someone has to be thinking like, is there a way to get home? And so when they go looking and they find that the truth is that there isn't, and when they find the truth of what's happening here and what's going on, and maybe they won't find that truth, but even if they do, that heartbreak, that moment of like everybody I knew and loved is just gone, and they have no idea what happened to me. Is just so traumatic, and that isn't such an adult story to tell. This isn't a kid's game that I grew up with anymore. This is so dark and deep, but yet we could still play with our toys.
Yeah,
so it's so great.
Drake Alexander is the easiest explanation to how the astral kind of transportation kind of works, so to speak. In that you have this moment of absolute heroism on like the beaches of Normandy. The grenade falls on the ground, ready to lay low an entire platoon of men kind of hidden behind a sand berm, and Drake throws himself on the grenade in order to save the other men in his unit. And as the story goes, he kind of with a flash of light dissipates and finds himself on Valhalla, and it creates this interesting conversation that is probably a little rhetorical at the moment. I don't think I have a firm belief one way or another. Does Drake die and we accept that Drake had a history up until that point on Earth, and that people are knowledgeable, his family and everything else to that moment, and he just died on the beaches of Normandy. Very similar to like an Amelia Earhart kind of narrative. It was here, we know her story, and then out of nowhere she just ceases to exist, and in a very unexplained way. Or is it a situation where when Jandar decides that Drake is worthy, and that his virtue makes him somebody worthy of going to Valhalla, when he chooses to take Drake to Valhalla, does Drake's existence erase from the timeline? And that also creates a situation where that is why you cannot bring 8 Drakes to Valhalla. You can't just go grab Drake in little increments in the timeline and just keep pulling multiple Drakes in, because when Jandar makes that choice, Drake Alexander ceases to exist as a thing in the timeline of Earth. And you can go all the way back. You can think of the cool comic book where his parents have a daughter instead, and the timeline changes because Jandar made that decision. And Drake never ceases to exist on Earth, but he does exist in the universe. He just has, when he is pulled, all of what he is pulled with him, and nothing is left behind. And so to your point, Joe, of like, if major heroes of the Clockwork are taken to Valhalla to fight a bigger war for higher stakes, them ceasing to exist, within their own battle lines, what would that do to the timeline of Noxdorma?
Is this like leading into possibly figuring out like multiverse scenarios?
Well, that's just it. It's almost trying to avoid the multiverse scenario, right? Because that
multiples, yeah.
That gets tricky, and you can see how it has instant implementation across the game mechanic, right? Why don't I have, all these different versions of Drake Alexander on the board at the same time? And the rule system prevents that on purpose. So, that might be one of those situations where we can figure out the world, we can figure out the story in a way that makes the game make sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that you bring up the fact that they might not even exist in the timeline anymore, because that was a big plot line in Phaland, actually. Classic Heroscape with the elf wizards. Every one of their bios would describe them as this really important magic user on their planet, and then there's this major war that was happening, and they were all being taken, each member of this magical order, and you would all their powers were connected to each other, so they were stronger together. But as each one was disappearing, the others felt their powers diminish. They were just like, wait, why can't I cast the spells the way I used to? They could feel their group losing power as each member's just inexplicably disappearing. And then, when they're attacking the wolves are disappearing too. So this entire war just got completely messed with by external forces, the Valkyrie. And I think it's in I want to say it's Chargeras. The last line in his bio is that we think we lost this war, because it's everyone's gone now, and it's that's a major point in Phalandian history. This war between the elves and the wolves was lost because the heroes of the war were taken out of the fighting and then get by the Valkyries. So it's just that would affect history in a very severe way, and whatever down the line that's a result of it. The wolves getting more power, such and so forth. But no, that's a really fascinating concept, because it was the hints were always there, that time was being messed with really badly, and now we get to see it actually in effect. So super super excited to see what's going to come out of that.
Yeah, I really like the idea that the Valkyrie are fumbling with this power.
Yep.
Right. They have no idea what they're really toying with, and all they care about is the here and now of winning this war, and the effects of harnessing that power as often as they are, this kind of unbridled and kind of uncontrolled way, needs to have consequences.
Yep.
It needs to create something that helps kind of build another layer to the cake of the story. And I always like the idea of kind of putting a little bit of that kind of moral kind of narrative into your world building, right? If any of you are Hero Quest players, there's something kind of really geeky happening on Hero Quest with all these introductions of all these new characters that I'm doing, that each one represents a different heroic virtue. And so when we do the lore videos and I write the lore video beat sheets out, every one of them teaches you a different thing, like duty and honor, right? And so each character has one of these kind of fundamental kind of heroic truths to them, with the idea that by the end you kind of have the entire pantheon of those virtues. So it just becomes my own kind of geeky world building to do that kind of stuff.
Now this and like you said, Chris, just a little bit ago, we're barely scratching the surface on this, and I'd like this to go on forever. But we definitely gonna have to have you back in the future to continue. Well, there's probably gonna be a few more times discussing this for hours at a time, which is great. But I do want to wrap up semi soon. When I mean wrap up, probably another half hour. But there are some comments that I do want to talk. I want to address in the chat right now, as well as just a couple of YouTube comments from last week. But before I do that, there is one question. Actually, it's I guess I'll coincide it, because this is one thing that Joe asked a long time ago, so I'll just include it with this. And so why? It's one thing he said. Why, bring this back, and as well as Age of Annihilation. what does that mean, really? What Annihilation are we talking about? If you can shine some light on it, if you can't answer, great. But if you can shine some light on those things, and then I'll get into comments.
All right, so the first question is, why is Heroscape back and why now? I think it's a combination of several other conversations. When we first brought Avalon Hill back, one of the most important things was, the idea that we were going to build a game system around HeroQuest. And apologize for the derpy chocolate lab wagging his collar right now. The HeroQuest functions as a very kind of linear narrative game system, right? It's not necessarily hard focused on the idea of competition, right? Zargon almost possesses the ability to almost, in theory, let the heroes win or kill them if they so choose, in a way. We wanted something that was a good competitive game. We wanted a good game we could bring out into tournaments, that we could have that balanced player versus player kind of system. It all coincided very well with the idea of what should that be, and what are the fundamental game mechanics of Heroscape. So it kind of fit in a way as a great piece in the portfolio as we were figuring out the portfolio. We've got this narrative driven story game system in HeroQuest. We've got this very loose sandbox of kind of social interaction in Betrayal House on the Hill. We have kind of the kind of my first experience with strategy gaming that is Risk. We wanted the good, strong, competitive player versus player war game, and Heroscape represented that for us. So it made sense that it was the next kind of pillar in building out the business. And that reveals a little bit of why it's so important that, on the Avalon Hill side, that we've been saying things like, oh, we're gonna make this fun, we're gonna see this through to the end. And it's because we have big plans for it, and we see it as one of the pillars to the business. It's not just a Kickstarter, it's not just a cash grab, it's not a one and done. That's not how we built the model. The model is to support Heroscape for an indefinite amount of time as a game system within Avalon Hill. And yes, to jumpstart this, the idea is to do this campaign, but it's not intended to be like some kind of one and done opportunity. Age of Annihilation, I struggled with how serialized the story seemed to me when I got into it. That it didn't feel like it was a progressive story. Now, I think a lot of us have filled the gaps to make it a progressive story for ourselves. But I think the hardest part was watching things like the webisodes and the comic books, where it felt like it was designed to be serialized. Not unlike things like Transformers and G.I. Joe cartoons of the 80s, where you would watch episode after episode, season after season, but Cobra and Joe, the war never went anywhere. It was war every Saturday morning, but it didn't necessarily progress, right? Nobody ever took over Cybertron when we were kids in the early 80s. So I was seeing the same formula in Heroscape, and it felt like a very antiquated logic to me. And as I took that and I combined it with the idea of this growing out Heroscape into this game system pillar, I had this kind of clash of those two things kind of hitting each other. I want to continue to introduce Heroscape every 6 months, put out a new product. But meanwhile, I have this story that doesn't go anywhere. It feels like I'm just doing the 1980s cartoon action figure thing, which didn't feel right to me at all. It didn't feel like it catered to an adult sensibility. right? It didn't feel like it was the kind of thing you give gamers. And so one of them had to give, and it wasn't going to be the idea of putting out Heroscape product every year. It was going to be the idea that the story felt serialized. And so I wanted to make it more episodic. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to progress. And my idea is to do that through campaign modules every 6 months or so. A new campaign comes out with new scenarios that moves the story forward, introduces new wars, new battles, new things, but it's moving to an end game. And you feel that as you keep investing every season in the new stuff that's coming out, right? Oh, here are new characters taking place in a new location that has new scenarios. Buy into this and continue your own episodic progression of your war. And so to do that, I was like, I need to move past that serialized thing that felt like it was happening. Age of Annihilation let me do that. It let me very, very quickly say the stakes are higher, the war is bigger, the factions, the legions are more numerous, that the enemies are greater and more numerous. And let me put all of that on the table very, very quickly, right? People hear that line and they get it, right? It's not just a little baby step. It's it's a big explosion. And so that title, that name, that era, that epoch term, is an easy message for me to get to the consumers.
Carries
Okay,
a lot of weight too.
Yeah, and I want
with Norse mythology.
right. Well, that's the other thing too, is I think that was where I really nerded out when I probably read several hundred pages of just Ragnarok and kind of Odin mythology and how much of Odin is in Jandar, and all of that became a great little research kind of moment in this whole process.
Wow. Yeah, and I think I got pinged on Discord. I think the Discord chat's blowing up a little bit over this live stream right now. But I mean, we are wrapping up for those of you who are just joining. But there's still some questions on the live chat that we're gonna talk about. There's actually quite a few now. So I'm gonna get those, talk about YouTube comments, and then we're gonna wrap for tonight. Well, definitely, Chris, if you can come back on in the future, we'll definitely have you back on, and I'm sure there'll be a few more hours and hours worth of stuff that we can still talk about. Let's get to these though first. Okay, Undamp Pick says, and thank you to everybody who's starting to join the stream and asking some questions. We'll get to you in a second. Undead Pick says, are there other avenues besides the game and the game components, rulebooks, packaging, where you guys are planning to tell the full, or planning to tell the story of Heroscape?
Well, if in the kind of zeitgeist of internal Hasbro, there is a term we use called the blueprint, right? And the blueprint is a business model within Hasbro for activating across a larger scope beyond the product, right? So that includes consumer products, it includes entertainment, it includes all the video games, everything else you could do with an intellectual property, with a brand, right? So when you apply something like Transformers to the blueprint, you talk about the console games that they're putting out, the comic books they're putting out, the t-shirts you can buy, right? All of those things, you can do with that brand, right? Part of my roles and responsibilities as the development lead on Avalon Hill is to be able to prep our games for that opportunity, right? That when a brand hits that critical mass and it is ready to be activated across that blueprint, that the material is there for all those partners to expand, right? So whether or not that happens in season 1, season 5, year 3, whatever that is, the goal is to have that material formulated in a way that can happen, right? So that if the fan community grows to that critical mass where they say, hey, we're at a point where we think we can sell Heroscape t-shirts, and we can sell Heroscape dice towers and dice bags and dice trays, and let's do a comic book, and let's do, whatever that is. When that moment happens, the stuff needs to be there and available. And it's kind of part of our responsibility to start formulating that stuff for that opportunity. So is there a line waiting at the door right now that we're going to do all that stuff in year 1? No, but the plan is that's why Hasbro is what it is, and that's why we have all that infrastructure and all those teams across the world and within the community so that we can, right? We just got to start right now, day 1, with getting this thing into market and getting it into players' hands, and once that happens, then it starts to unlock all those other doors.
And Undampik also says, how did the team decide to assign the units to the generals? Did any units change generals during the process? Why did Ular not get any love this round, with the exception of one figure?
I think a lot of we wanted Revna and Valarek to kind of come out with enough of a story and enough of an army composition that they are the big story in this particular Vanguard edition, so that we can make a big deal out of bringing 2 Valkyrie into the world. But there were all these little opportunities as Craig and the War Council were picking things apart and kind of scratching at the surface of other things, and the Kyrie are probably the best example of there were gaps, things they wanted to fill, right? So we got into conversations of hey, Vidar never had a Kyrie. Let's do a Vidar Kyrie. We never saw the Moon Tribe. Let's do the Moon Tribe. Those things became part of the conversation. And then when we really started beefing up and we were finding that we had a lot of good momentum on some of the armies, like the Clockwork, for example, it kind of created the opportunity to say, hey, let's carve off kind of what we're doing right now with this kind of concept of melee-focused, tanky Clockwork, and carve them out to be their own thing. Let's give them their own species. They're starting to feel a certain way. That tone seems to align with an opportunity to maybe give them over to Jandar. That's kind of how the Urson kind of elevated to that point. So it kind of became all these things that, and there were some characters like Captain Bachburna that it felt natural that it would, lie with Utgar, and it would let us kind of do that. Or EJ1M, made a lot of sense to make that a Vidar character. So we were doing those kind of things all through the process of kind of breaking them down a little bit. And sometimes we would create really cool opportunities that the War Council would, speak up and say, this kind of creates this awesome kind of synergy and power ability with something else that's been going on in that faction for a long time, kind of thing, with that particular general. So it kind of created a lot of kind of little moments where you could kind of give these subtle little nods to the game mechanics, the meta, things like that over time. A little bit of it is still a little bit in flux. We've talked about the Ular thing a few times, that there, is there an opportunity to maybe move a couple of the dry-in over to Ular to kind of just put a couple of those in place, so that the Sonlin stretch goal isn't the only thing kind of denoted right now for Ular. But it also has generated a lot of conversations for downstream, because we can immediately start talking about the retail material as, okay, well, where do we want to go with that? Who do we want to talk about? Who do we want to leverage? What stories do we want to tell there? And again, kind of keep fleshing out different Valkyrie kind of allocations all through the line.
And let's see, I'm gonna some of these comments aren't questions, I'm gonna skip them, but I'm just gonna say hello Arable, Gimberly the Giant, thank you guys for commenting on the stream. Here, I'm just going to get to what is relevant, because if I address these, we're going to be here all night. Or if I address all of these, we'll be here all night. Let's see here. Let's see. I know there was one. Oh yeah, Undent Pick also says, if you see it as, I think it was something you mentioned earlier, if you see it as a pillar of Avalon Hill's future, why not go straight to retail?
Well, I think the biggest issue there is how much the tooling costs on Heroscape.
Yep.
There's a lot of plastic in that box, and that means there's a lot of tooling, right? Getting approval to put that much tooling on something, again, like when we talked early on about lacking data, right? You walk into that room and you're like, we don't have good data on that demographic and the size of that group and what their spending habits are and whether or not they're going to embrace the return of Heroscape. We don't know how big that community is. You go in there with that kind of data, and then you say, hey, can we have $1 million in tooling? That's a very difficult conversation, right? HeroQuest provided an easy way to show that there were people who wanted to buy that product, that they wanted to support that product, that there was an opportunity there. And once it succeeded in its backing, it opened the doors for us to sit down with the executives and be like, all right, well, what are you guys doing next year? What do you mean? Well, you're making this thing a big deal, right? Because this is beautiful. So we got to create that kind of critical mass with Heroscape too, and be like, look, we've used the HasLab to fund the tooling. That tooling creates a tooling library, is what it is called. That means that we can continue to use the tooling on the terrain indefinitely and color it anything we want. If we want hot lava death, if we want Thaylink tundra, if we want all of those things, the tooling exists now, right? We can do all those things because we have the tooling again, right? And here is some qualitative data on the size of that community and what they're willing to spend and where their spending habits are and what they're asking for in terms of the next season of product, and all those things start to create the kind of snowball effect behind the pillar, right? But it is, I think people assume that Hasbro is some mega corporation that just shoots bags of money at cannon, and we can afford to do anything. It doesn't actually work like that. I mean, the company hasn't been around for 100 years because they just take giant risks on stuff. So appreciate the logic, but I think if everybody were flies on the wall of the day-to-day of a business like this, they would be like, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. So
Yep.
And again, on Discord this week, Money Cannon Ferengi figure confirmed. Okay, Rogue Idealist, thank you for joining the chat. See, Rogue Idealist says, I was hoping we get an old man Drake with a big beard to represent how I feel as an adult nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, there were a few people that were asking. I think Lincoln was on there several times.
Or the motorcycle. Yeah,
old man on the motorcycle. And that created another lore question, which was...
Age in Valhalla.
Does anything happen on Valhalla? Right? Is time completely relative on Valhalla? It creates that question, right? And I knew when we put Drake out, that was going to be the thing everybody was going to point at, try to break down that question a little bit, because he hasn't aged a day. So it was kind of almost like dropping a bomb in the room and stepping back out of the room for a moment and seeing what was going to happen.
Letting it go, yeah.
Right. But it does because in my mind, this war should feel like it's the most important thing in the universe, and it should have this weight of a little bit of supernatural, a little bit of outerworldly, a little bit of like all the powers of the universe are coalescing around this one planet for what we don't know yet is a thing. And very base level things like natural progression of time, feel weak in that story when it starts to happen. And again, it goes back, Jeremy, to like your analysis of Ragnarok, right?
Right.
Waking up every day, after feasting in the mead hall and warring all day, kind of thing. It's something. It's some fun unanswered questions. I think the community can continue to debate a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure.
Nice.
For sure.
I mean, there has to be something going on because Solin's dragon is now an adult. Unless they evolve like a Pokemon, you just give them a gem or something. I mean, that's probably logical too. But
Hey, we never got the rules of dragon physiology.
It's true.
So,
Yeah.
You could just be like, maybe Sonlin went to bed and then woke up and he's like, who are you? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm the same.
There was a
Speaking and
moment.
everything.
I'm gonna date myself a little bit, but there was this movie in the early '80s called Ice Pirates, right? And there was they got stuck in like forgive me, I haven't watched it in such a long time, but they get stuck in like a time well or something in the course of the movie because they're all like, flying around in spaceships. And when they do, they all like flicker in and out of time, and they start drastically changing their ages as it's happening. Right? And it's happening instantaneous, and it's happening at different levels to different people in different parts of the ship. And it was one of those like scenes that I kind of had in my head, trying to break down the theories behind this thing.
Nice.
If again we're just messing with the raw substance of creation on this planet, what is that doing to all these bystanders who are being drawn in here by these Valkyrie? What's happening to them? What's happening to the planet?
Okay, we got more questions here. Arable, and I don't know if this question might be better for Craig Van Ness, but we'll still ask it anyway. Craig can come on feature too if he chooses to. Arable says, I have a question regarding the honor guards. If an opponent's unique hero got infested twice, so we got multiple honor guards on this card, do I get to roll multiple times for a parasite, or is it just once per round per hero?
Craig answered that question in your battle. Because he said it does trigger multiple ones. You get to roll for each one on the armor card.
Yeah. The one caveat that you can read in there though is that you need to have the model available, right? So there was truly a perfect storm happening on that board that he had killed one of the models that provided the opportunity to place the model on the hero card.
Yeah.
So the easiest mechanic that's kind of preventing it from getting out of control is if you don't have available honor guards in your removal pile, then you don't have the ability to kind of keep placing them on opponents' heroes cards, and you wouldn't necessarily get that opportunity. But I think as rules is written, I think it's stating that you would roll multiple times, one for each honor guard on the hero card.
And see,
I'm sure there's an FAQ in there somewhere. I can see it already. So.
Oh yeah, much of errata.
And so your Myth26 Real, thank you Myth26 Real for joining the chat. And you already basically answered this question, just asked, will there be plush toys? And as you already said, planning process in the future, it's something we'll have to look forward to. Let's see here, let me get to...
Sounds like the Spring Runner would have to probably be one of the early ones.
The Lich Lord, of course.
Great plush idea. I would love a Lich Lord plush.
Maladrix.
Hand that to a 5-year-old and just be like, enjoy.
Yeah, I have to go to bed with my Lich Lord. I mean,
there's also a cult following on the quote-unquote Cthulhu Daddy concept.
Oh yeah.
making the plush Cthulhu daddy apparently is also a major priority. So
Hey, my
I mean,
son,
people get endeared to weird things. I'll say that. So
my
you
son,
never
when
know.
he was like 1 or 2 years old, he wanted to carry around a Morrow hive all the time, and he still does. He still does. He's 4, and he still likes that thing. Let's see here. Yeah, go ahead.
Even the most nastiest looking bug things he made into adorable plush toys. So just keep that in mind.
yeah, festering honor guard, and you get multiples and you lay them around your bed to keep away the boogeyman.
Oh
kind of thing.
yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, there you go. Sold already. Let's see here. Let me get to these.
Build-A-Bear Frostclaw Paladin.
Okay.
It got so popular that they started offering them at Build-A-Bear.
No, that's perfect cross promotion right there. Honestly, just
Jason,
put a
are we-
little Heroscape label on it and everything. Be like, build your own Frostclaw.
Right? Yeah.
Or
The game will fill itself at that
hero
point.
that turns into the little festering honor guard when you turn him inside out.
Yeah. I was gonna say, but the Hellforge, you could just take other plushes and just stuff it in there to store.
Oh, we are totally going off the rails, which is wonderful. Okay.
New marketing team here.
I'd love to tell you this conversation is completely different from the way things happen in the building, but this is how the conversation goes.
Arable says, I'm interested on how much more promo is planned. Are they going to sponsor some big influencers to promote the campaign?
That I'm just gonna leave as TBD right now, right? I don't want to steal any thunder. I don't want to give anything away. But again, we're committed. We're taking action steps, and we've got ideas. So.
Let's see here, and yeah, Myth 26, you're all good. Let's see here. Oh, my goodness, more. And if I don't name all of you on the chat, I'm sorry. But thank you everybody for that's coming on here. Let's see here. Battlebrow, yeah, thank you for joining the chat. Let's see here. Myth 26 Real says we need a Hellforge to be painted like a pizza oven. Yes. See, Undamp Pick says I buy all of these. And Airball says yeah, TBD is good enough for me. Yeah, that kind of answers it without answering it really. All right, thank you guys for the chat. So let me get. Now we just have 3 comments from our podcast last week on YouTube. So let me just get those, and then we will wrap up. So let me see. I get the. Let's see here. Yeah, Myth26. Don't go anywhere because this live stream ain't done. When we're done with the podcast section, this live stream ain't done, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's get to these comments here. Real quick, let me see. G Busy first. Let me get to these. I'm gonna go this one first. Okay. Now I kind of don't understand this question, but I'll just bring it up. It says G Busy says I would like to challenge Ben who's the biggest fan of the Castros of Valhalla podcast. So I think you got competition, Ben, with G Busy here. And also thank you for the answer on to the narration question from my previous comment. I'm excited to see you guys cover more of the journal entries in the future. So that's kind of addressed to you, Ben. I'm sure you probably read that comment already.
Yep.
And let's see here. G Busy also says, this is a completely random question, but I have a lore question. Okay, and I'm actually direct this at Chris too. Meagle's Tomb is a map scenario from Rise of the Valkyrie, and in Wave 9, we get a dwarf hero named Miguel Ironwill. Are these related? And if so, how?
I would say no, because Miguel Ironwill is from Phaelund, and Miguel's Tomb is in reference to the Archkyrie Miguel II. I think it's because the naming convention, right? So, dwarves are Norse mythology, and the Kyrie are Norse mythology, so they share linguistic similarities. So Miguel's a very Nordic name, but I don't think they were meant to be connected. It was just, reference material coming from the same place. That's my take on it, but obviously I don't have the source material on hand. So I don't know if they've ever really said anything about that.
Yeah, I don't think I encountered that one at all, but you're spot on about how there's going to be similarities linguistically across character names. That tends to be one of the paths for naming conventions in Heroscape. tends to be a little bit of backwards historical research into especially European linguistics gets used a lot. So I can see the team having run into things sounding very similar multiple times, even though they weren't intended to have relationships that they feel like they do to the fans.
All right, and then one last comment here from Demon Hunter, and I have no idea who this person is. Thanks for having us on, and this was the group of guys that was with us last week. It was definitely a fun time. Yes, it was. Some thoughts on the compass, which was the image that Chris dropped on us a week ago, specifically regarding the octopus and water motifs. A, could just be decorative due to being placed in an ocean on the map. I'm thinking that's placement, yeah. B, the face is related to the octopus, Master of the Sea concept art we got. Yeah, that's one thing question we were asking, Chris. Where is that? What's that face? Who is it?
Yeah.
And C, the in-game markers of the map are the exiles of the Sundered Sea, and being ocean-minded, decorate everything with water or sea monster motifs.
So, what actually happened is my family and I went on vacation about a month ago, and we went camping in Connecticut, and we went to Mystic Seaport, right? And Mystic Seaport has a nautical museum, and it's this big sprawling almost campus that is this old kind of port and shipyard area that's been around for hundreds of years, and they've kind of converted it into this kind of walking, compound of a museum. Well, they do all this amazing stuff there, including like refurbishing old wooden ships, and they had one out there. They had dry docked it, and they had all these crews kind of crawling all over this thing, kind of sanding it down and repainting it and everything else, so they could send it back to like Delaware or Maryland or wherever it was originally housed. And there was a building there that was just the prows of all these beautiful ships that are no longer here, and all they were managed to save was these beautiful carvings on the front of all these ships. They have them all in this museum, and as you go through it, they explain all this kind of superstition and nautical culture through how they did all these different carvings and why they did them and the subject matter in which they did them. And it ranges all over the place. Giant krakens and, mermaids and everything in between. And that was actually the thing that inspired the conversation on the Rose Compass a little bit, was that there is this feeling like this other culture of symbolism that carries through into cartography and map making and nautical kind of exploration and everything like that. And so we talked it through when we were kind of Rob, who's the principal graphic designer on Avalon Hill, myself, and Mike Tweakham, who is the illustrator on the compass, and we kind of went through this whole conversation. And I was like, I really want that feel. I really want this thing to have that edge that makes it feel like there's so much more to the Kyrie culture and anthropology, and that you feel like there's so much more when you see one of these things, that that there's a depth to their people that you just don't know yet. And so it kind of produced that image, based on all those combinations of things. And I was like, this is beautiful. This is exactly what I want. I want to create exactly what's happening here, which is like, what does this mean? Who is this? Why was it done? Where did this come from? What is the background? Like, that's exactly why we did it, so that it makes the world feel rich, right? Without necessarily just like formulaically giving answers to it all. Like, I want those open-ended things in the world, because I think one of the beautiful things about this game is like people embrace the idea that they are allowed to infuse their own creativity into this game, right? People make these beautiful maps. You guys write these beautiful stories. Like, you can make it your own, right? You're allowed to kind of get in there and roll up your sleeves and be creative with this, and you have permission to do so to speak. These little things give like the quiet little permission slips along the way. Like, this doesn't have an answer, right? They're not giving you the formulaic reason of why this thing is. I'm gonna go make that up. I'm gonna go have fun with that. I'm gonna go do a water map. I'm gonna go story. I'm gonna go write a campaign, and I'm gonna dream about a faction, a group, a unit, or something that I have never seen before. And that's what it's for. That's why it's there.
Awesome. And I think we will close it at that for this podcast portion of the live stream, and we'll do our sign-offs. And you guys know the drill, but make your final thoughts very, very quick, because I kind of figured this was going to be the case, that we were going to go long, which is just fine. But let's try and wrap it up as quickly as we can. I'll start. Jason, go ahead. Say where people can find you, and final thoughts.
So I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. You can find my videos over at tabletopbattlefield.com, Rocket Robotics on YouTube, and Legends of Caladasia, my space combat game, is hanging out over at EmpireUnderSiege.com.
Any final thoughts?
Oh, I wrapped up quick because you wanted things to wrap up quick.
Oh, final thought is fine. It's fine.
You did it quick, yeah.
You did.
Oh, well, I don't know. Sure.
I know you're tired, man. I know you're tired. Okay, so nothing.
Okay, I guess if I have to give a final thought, I will say that I was wrong, and that the assumption was that you were trolling GW with the Abomination. So that was my guess, and apparently I was wrong. All right, that's all I got for you.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this short because I could talk too. Man, it is so awesome to know that that this game is in good hands, and even from the concept art, I already knew that, from there, I truly felt that we were in good hands. That there's no way this couldn't, have a chance to be backed. And I hope more and more people that come into this game will hopefully see this and see all the other content that we put out and all the other Discord updates that the Avalon Hill team puts out, and just sees that, look, if we can just get past this point, that if there's anything that in this offering that is not like your 100% favorite thing in the world, if we can get past this, then something that you do truly love and want to see in Heroscape is gonna happen. But we just have to get to this one big hump. We get over this hill, literally this Avalon Hill, and we'll get this game to be way bigger than we could ever imagine. And it's a blast to play. It's so wonderful to talk about the story implications of what this game could truly be, and how these stories are going to be told in the future. Because my mind is already running wild of all the different possibilities of what this could possibly mean for storytelling, and what kind of stories, even for short films, depending on how it comes out with how time works and how the universe is, like writing a script about something like that would be so amazing, and trying to figure out like what kind of cool story could we tell in our own house about what would happen if someone disappeared and they went to Valhalla, and the drama and that kind of thing is just insane. But I'm excited. I'm just excited, and I just hope everyone else is excited. But yeah, so I am clearly not crazy, but Joe Crazy. Joe Crazy 3193. You can find me on YouTube. I'm trying to do a little bit more Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all those things. But yeah, so this week is gonna be busy for me. I got some more update videos for you guys. I'm still like 2 weeks behind, so if you see something you're like, wait, I've seen that already. It's okay. I'm doing a weekly roundup. So I'm working on that, and I gotta put in my 2 cents with the app. Patrick dropped that on us, so I gotta make a video about that. And of course, I want to see if I can maybe look at that battle again and maybe put some editing tweaks of my own to it. So looking forward to it all. But thank you, Ryan.
Jeremy.
All right. So final thoughts, just to put it out there, and I've always brought it up. I bring it up on my streams, and I bring it up in various scenarios when it's important. But Heroscape was the reason why I decided to become a writer, and like it actually inspired my first like major writing project. It was the first public writing offering that I ever did. Like I posted my first stuff on the Heroscapers forums, and like the Heroscapers there were like, "Oh, this is really good. We like this." And that made me more confident in my own craft. And so like seeing that this game that inspired my own writing is being taken care of by people who have these fantastic ideas and who have, you know, this care and concern and focus on the story, and they're doing a really, really good job at you know, capturing the you know, obscure details. Like, you know, you mentioned about the magical weapons. I mean, that gets mentioned what, like twice, and like one in the character bio and like somewhere in Thorman's journals. It's obscure little references I'm catching that you're making that make me happy, and I'm just like, cool. I'm you know, I'm glad to know that this is in the hands of some expert storytelling, and I'm super excited to see what's in the future. You know, the gameplay video has been sparking up some conversations. I actually got in touch with a friend I haven't had a chance to talk to in like 8 years because of this Heroscape offering, because me and him played Heroscape all the time. And you know, we were talking about the gameplay video, and he mentioned to me about Deadeye Dan. I don't know if you've ever been familiar with that guy. He has a power that can auto kill, and I auto killed one of his dragons back in the day. He never ever got, like, he placed the dragon. He was super excited to use it, and I shot him with the 19, and the dragon was dead instantly.
Let's
so like,
go, Deadeye Dan.
like it's sparking all these nostalgic memories. Like watching that gameplay video reminded me of all my fantastic Heroscape moments, and then I'm using that to share it with other friends. And you know, I got friends who are backing now because of it, and it's just it's stupendous. Like, it's just great to see these moments. Didn't never have thought that would be a thing. You know, obviously Heroscape was a very good memory of the time, but I never thought it would come back. So I'm super excited to see what the future Heroscape holds. And I'm glad it is in the hands of yours and your wonderful team. You guys are doing fantastic work. So if you ever feel any like drop in motivation or mood, I just imagine me doing like, you know, cheer waving. I'm cheering y'all on indefinitely at this point. You guys got this. I believe in you. So you're doing really good stuff. So thank you so much. And for those that want to find me, my content, I run the Eslam Collate. It is a lore-based channel. I cover narrative design for video games and board games. You can find me on Twitch. You can find me on Twitter, and find my content on YouTube.
Ben.
Final thoughts that bring it back to the video. That video got me really hyped. Try out. It made me want to proxy the figures. Jeremy commented in our little group chat after watching the video. He's like, "Man, I got to get a friend to help me proxy these figures so I can battle them." And that's, you know, same idea I had. Like that it was truly awesome to just see them on the board doing the work that they were made for. And like I said, getting that parasite to trigger, that was video worthy. And it just sparked my imagination for what this game could bring in the future. It sparked my imagination for what other abilities and like attacks you guys have on the other cards. You just had 5 or 6 cards that you showed us, and there's 51 in total. So super excited. all these new game mechanics are really going to change up the meta. I can already see just the 7.6 that you released already changing up the meta of Heroscape. So that's good news for everybody. Just super excited. Thanks for coming on. I know we all thank you already, but thank you for coming on. I'm sure all of the viewers of the podcast, well, listeners of the podcast and viewers of the live stream appreciate you being on too. We got nothing for love for you guys, for the Avalon Hill team. And you guys are really the reason why we formed up Voltron to talk about your guys' your guys' expedition into this new territory for all of us, really. So thank you guys. And I'm MK Plus Ultra. You can find me on YouTube. MK Plus Ultra is my channel. Me and my brother Alex, we do battle videos, Heroscape battle videos. We're right now we're kind of down. Me and my brother, I've been going back. I've had to go back to work. I just had a daughter, but my leave of absence is up, so I'm back at work. I started working on graveyard shift, so my hours are extremely different. My brother Alex, he's actually started up his own pop-up, so his hours are completely different, but we're getting together and we're trying to get these battles filmed for you guys. But yeah, just be patient with us. A lot of life changes going on right now, but the channel is still active. We are planned a whole bunch more videos, and we have a giveaway going right now. And hope to see you guys soon. But you guys can catch me here every Sunday, so you'll get your MK Plus Ultra fix here on the ToV live stream. So I think that's good enough for right now.
Thanks, Ben. And Chris, if I mean everybody knows where you are, but if you just want to give a final thought or final thing to say before we close, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would say a lot of comments came in tonight about where this could go, what other ways we could talk about Heroscape, other ways we could engage with the brand, to expand our fandom. And I'll say this. I'll say, the other gentlemen on this Discord call with me today, they represent everything you're looking for in expanding your fandom, right? Having content creators who are bringing out all these conversations, all these debates, all these discussions, all this material. It's a glut of amazing material that lets you engage with the brand in all different ways beyond just playing the game. And so support them, support the content creators, be there for them the way they're, stepping up to be there for you. Like, subscribe, do those things for them, because you don't know what you have until you lose it. And so, make sure that, with such a strong community, with such an amazing community, you're all supporting each other, because I think that was how you all made it through the last 12 years. And now that you have this kind of renaissance of Heroscape for a moment, take advantage and support each other and support the content creators, because they're doing amazing work. And I'll tell you, like the Avalon Hill team, we're subscribed to all the channels, we watch all the videos, we listen to everything, because we so much appreciate what you guys are doing. And it's also an amazing source for us to gather feedback and intel and hear the pulse of the community out there. So keep up what you're doing. Thank you so much. Super appreciate you guys having me, and all the support you've given this whole campaign. I know you guys have gone above and beyond on multiple occasions to make this thing a success. And then a lot of the community, some of the people who are listening in, and I mean, you guys are doing absolutely like mind-boggling efforts to try to see this to succeed, whether it's spreadsheets of data or posters being put up at flag stores or people trying to break the algorithm on Google, like the stuff that absolutely nuts. And the Avalon Hill team appreciates every little thing that you guys are doing, because it just reinforces to us that we're doing this for all the right reasons. So thank you.
Absolutely. And again, everybody, like, if you're watching this on YouTube, after, like, go to links in the description, press all the buttons, subscribe, check out the crowdfunding campaign, and if you choose to, back it. I don't think you're gonna be disappointed for sure. And I'm Ryan, Tales of Valhalla, the creator of Tales of Valhalla: The Aftermath Chronicles, which is a stop-motion Heroscape adventure. And just some of the comments that were mentioned, just this, it's bringing some emotions back into me because of these past several years making this show. For me, was it was staying alive because of the illness I have, all the hospital stays, and I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I had no way of interacting with people because I was at home all the time, and I was in a lot of pain all the time. And my creative sandbox, my avenue, was the fact of realizing that Heroscape miniatures aren't going to go anywhere if you leave them on the table while animating for weeks on end, and that's happened. And so, in a sense, this game, this dead game that I was animating for no reason at all, other than just wonderful sandbox, it kept me alive in a lot of ways, and it kept me going, and still doing it, and it's brought this community together. And I'm just glad that I didn't give up on it. I'm really glad that I'm not giving up on it. And for like promotion of that, there's going to be another episode of Tales of Valhalla released this Wednesday. So if you want to check out the live stream, I think some of us will be back to enjoy that content, seeing some heroes kicking the tails of some bad guys. We'll see what happens, because there's some storylines that will be wrapped and some that'll continue, because there's still a lot more of season 3 left. So I look forward to that. And like I said, this live stream will continue. This podcast is ending. And before I do close the podcast, I do just want to mention the comment, because there's still conversation going on in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't read all these at the moment, but I do just want to Rogue Idealist. Thank you, Rogue Idealist, for comment. It says, thank you so much, and I think it's telling you, Chris, thank you so much for the hard work and smiling through the negativity. For sure, I think that's for all of us too. And Undamp Pick, you have a question about I'm surprised that we didn't get into much details about the cards. Will that be featured on next week's episode? Yes, we'll get into those. We kind of glanced over that, but I mean we talked about a lot of things tonight, but we will go through the cards.
You went everywhere.
This coming Sunday, so for sure.
Just like Heroscape, like everything.
Exactly.
And yeah, just appreciate all the comments. And like I said, this live stream will continue, so for those of you who want to stay on, it will take a little break, but the live stream will continue. But for those of you who are watching this, the ToV podcast here, first interview with Chris on YouTube or through the audio sphere. We're just going to end it here. And so just appreciate everybody the time, the listening. Just do your due diligence, listen, research, learn, and possibly back the campaign. Like I said, it won't. I don't think it'll be a waste of your time. It's a game that definitely brings people and families together, for sure. And I think it's going to still continue that way. You have a purpose in your life. Find it, pursue it, live it. We'll see you guys next time.
Later.